Chapter 570. Suddenly, a slowly rotating golden lotus appeared in the air, radiating a brilliant light. As the indestructible golden body continued to form hand seals, the lotus also began to fall apart. Petals flew out in all directions, but just as they flew out, they began to change again. Each golden petal quickly turned into 2, then 4, 8, and finally thousands, tens of millions of petals. The process of change seemed slow and was clearly visible, but in fact, it was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, the area of more than 1,000 meters around Hanjin had become a sea of flowers. This incomparably dazzling, whirling world seemed somewhat out of place with the craggy plain of bones. The lifeless abandoned land suddenly became lively amidst the surging of the endless sea of flowers. As soon as the sparkling bones came into contact with the petals, their color quickly dimmed and then disintegrated into countless fine powder. Everywhere the tide of flowers passed, everything turned into dust. After condensing the indestructible gilded body, Hanjin's control of Taoism had reached a very fine state. When the petals fluttered in front of Ankiel, they did not continue to move forward as if they had a mind of their own. Instead, they gently revolved around Ankiel. As the number of petals continued to increase, Ankiel's figure could no longer be seen. Although her line of sight was blocked, Ankiel did not panic. She did not continue to run away, but just stood there quietly. Ankiel knew very well that this was Hanjin's protection for her. In the majestic golden sea, Hanjin's expression became solemn and respectful. This was his respect for heaven and earth, and also his relief for the countless suffering lives. At this moment, his state of mind was clear. The so-called immortals, Buddhas, and the so-called gods were just some existences that had great divine powers. There was not much difference in essence, and Hanjin was infinitely close to the great success of the gilded body. If a precise description had to be given, it would be that he had already taken the last step, but his foot had not yet landed on the target. When the indestructible gilded body reached the state where he could release Taoism, Hanjin had a lot of choices. He was also clear about the effects of various Taoism. The reason why he released the Red Lotus Hellfire was simply that it was the most suitable. The more suffering one endured in life, the stronger one's karma would be. Of course, the stronger one's karma was, the greater one's karma would be. The Red Lotus Hellfire was the most powerful Taoist art to sweep away and cleanse all karma. When the golden lotus bloomed, Danton had rushed to a place less than 100 meters away from Hanjin. At such a distance, it was impossible to make any changes. The sea expanded too quickly, and Danton crashed into it. Petals fluttered happily. After touching Danton, they immediately merged into his body and disappeared. The soft and weak petals seemed to be harmless, but the rapidly melting skin showed what kind of damage Danton had suffered. As more and more petals merged into Danton's body, Danton finally could not bear it anymore. A silent roar came from the depths of his soul. Danton did not know whether it was his nature or Staia's control, but he did not retreat in this situation. Instead, he continued to shoot forward like a cannonball and forcibly broke through the sea of flowers. Although there was almost no flesh and blood on Danton's body, and even his bones were damaged, he finally got what he wanted. He successfully rushed to the sky above Hanjin. Then he waved his giant axe and chopped at Hanjin fiercely. Hanjin's eyes were slightly closed, and his face was expressionless, as if he did not see the giant axe whistling toward him. Hanjin did not move, but the invincible gilded body behind him suddenly took a step forward and punched out. Boom! A thunderous sound resounded over the bone plane. Danton's body shot backward at a speed faster than when he came, drawing a straight trajectory and landing heavily on the ground, splashing smoke and dust all over the sky. The invincible gilded body retreated 5 or 6 steps under the strong impact, but Hanjin did not move at all. He was a little surprised. He did not expect the king of the dwarves to be able to maintain such amazing offensive power in the Red Lotus Hellfire. It was a pity that such a strong man had been reduced to an undead creature. The endless sea of flowers also surrounded Doreen. Learning from Danon's mistake, Doreen was extremely vigilant against these dazzling little petals. The bowstring in her hand flicked again and again, constantly shooting out light blades to shatter the petals flying toward her. However, no matter how fast Doreen released the light blades, she could not keep up with the speed of the petals disintegrating. As the number of petals increased sharply, Doreen's fingers danced in the air, trying to block every petal that tried to get close to her. But compared to the huge sea of flowers, Doreen's figure was a little too thin. The spirit dragons collectively spat out their dragon's breath at the sea of flowers that was rapidly approaching. Dozens of scorching white air currents condensed into one, like a waterfall falling from the sky. Countless flower petals dissipated under the impact, but this small gap was immediately filled by the other flower petals. The seemingly ferocious dragon's breath was like a river flowing into the sea, only causing a few ripples before disappearing. The dragons only had time to release their dragon's breath once before the dragons that were closer to Hanjin were drowned in the endless sea of flowers. Whether it was the spirit dragons or the bone dragons, all of them let out a miserable cry that was enough to tear their souls apart. Their hard bone armor could not withstand the erosion of the petals at all. They could even clearly see their bodies rapidly wither and fade like dried rocks, and then peel off piece by piece. There was nothing more frightening than watching one's own body disintegrate bit by bit, even for undead creatures. The spirit dragons and skeletal dragons that did not manage to escape in time rolled and struggled helplessly in the sea of flowers, but they could not escape. Occasionally, they would use all their strength to spit out dragon breaths, but they could only create a small blank space in the sea of flowers, unable to slow down the erosion of the petals at all. Compared to the spirit dragons, the lower-ranked Knights of Terror were more determined. After witnessing the miserable state of the dragons, they did not hesitate to charge at Hanjin's position. And between the Knights of Terror and Hanjin was an endless sea of flowers, or rather, a sea of death. There were no rousing shouts, nor were there any declarations before death. There was only the sound of horse hooves that shook the whole plain of bones. The Knights of Terror were silent, and without a word, they poured into the gorgeous sea of flowers in front of them like a tide. But under the huge difference, numbers did not equate to strength. Dantine, the king of the hills, could rush to Hanjin's side under the erosion of the sea of flowers, but the Knights of Terror could not do so. Even the knights' spears that they threw at Hanjin from afar were melted by the petals in the process of flying and disintegrated into countless scattered dust. The first thing that was melted was the armor of the knights, and then the bone horses under them. The strong bones were rapidly becoming thin, and as they galloped, fine powder constantly fell from them, as if countless invisible files were constantly grinding their bodies. When the limbs were so small that they could no longer support their running, the sound of bones breaking could be heard one after another. The knights leaped up the moment the skeletal horses fell. They did not care about their mounts that were rolling in the dust and continued to charge into the depths of the sea of flowers without stopping at all. But their ending was already foreseeable. Even if they could rush to Hanjin's side, their severely corroded bodies would not allow them to launch any effective attacks. Since Hanjin's appearance, the situation had been completely reversed. The two strong men from the Age of Heroes, who had been chasing after Ankiel, had been beaten into the dust by Hanjin, while Doreen had fallen into the endless sea of flowers. At this moment, she couldn't even protect herself, let alone attack Hanjin. If that was the case, then it was only a matter of time before Hanjin wiped out these large numbers of undead creatures. But of course, the god of the underworld, Staya, could not watch everything that he had painstakingly built up be destroyed in a day. An enormous wave of mental strength surged out from the depths of the abandoned land like a tidal wave. Protected by the petals, Ankiel could not help but show a pained expression. The mental strength this time was much more violent than the previous ones. Not only did Ankiel feel dizzy, but also felt as if his head was being torn apart. Even with his strong physique, He could not withstand it. On the other hand, the undead creatures seemed to have been injected with stimulants. Their strength suddenly increased by a lot, and even the bone horses that had been corroded beyond recognition stood up shakily from the ground. Ripples visible to the naked eye suddenly appeared in the air. Wherever the ripples passed, the golden petals melted like snowflakes that fell into a lake, disappearing into the void. The ripples kept appearing, and the petals kept splitting. The two sides were evenly matched. The sea of petals had been limited from 1,000 meters to a few hundred meters. It could not advance any further, and the transparent ripples could not penetrate the sea of petals. Han Jin cast his gaze in the direction of the mental strength. He was shocked by the immense mental strength of the god of the underworld, Staya. It was obvious that Denver could not do this. When he released the hellfire of the Red Lotus to attack the fallen angel Catherine, she was also busy dealing with it. Even if Denver was stronger than Catherine, there was still a certain limit to it. But the enemy had not yet appeared, and he had destroyed the hellfire of the Red Lotus with his mental strength alone. It seemed that Ankiel's judgment was right. At this moment, something strange happened. Han Jin suddenly sensed that an incomparably obscure, soul-like thing was quietly flying towards him, and it was only a few meters away from him. Han Jin's expression changed. Ever since he had condensed the immortal golden body, nothing could escape from Han Jin's perception. He had no time to think about the reason behind it. He only had time to pinch a seal, and a layer of golden light instantly covered his body, but it still could not stop the invasion of that thing. After that thing entered Han Jin's sea of consciousness, it immediately began to stir up trouble. An indescribable strange feeling swept through Han Jin's body and mind. Unlike the cultivators in this world, Han Jin cared most about the stability of his state of mind. Now that his sea of consciousness was under attack, he naturally did not dare to take it lightly. His fingers danced like butterflies among flowers, pinching a variety of seals. The immortal golden body behind him also did the same as Han Jin. Suddenly, a golden light shone in the air, and Han Jin's whole body was wrapped in dazzling light. At the same time, the speed of the splitting and reproduction of the sea of flowers slowed down as Han Jin was distracted. The area covered by the countless ripples had shrunk to less than 100 meters. Suddenly, there was a loud bang from the ground, and countless sand and stones splashed into the air. Danding's battered figure soared into the sky. It turned out that in the confrontation with the immortal golden body, just now, Danding had been beaten deep into the ground by that kind of powerful force. However, Danding did not directly rush to Han Jin. Instead, he landed steadily on the ground and stared at the shrinking sea of flowers, waiting for the moment when the sea of flowers was completely swallowed by the ripples that were constantly emerging. At the same time, Doreen had also escaped from the sea of flowers. At this moment, she was plucking her bowstring, sending out light blades to eliminate the gradually thinning petals. The Knight of Terror and the dragons also rushed over. Even a fool could see that this was the best time to attack. Seeing Han Jin's predicament, the sharp voice laughed out loud. "It's useless. Give up the futile resistance. You've been cursed by me. Soon, you'll taste the taste of death." Upon hearing this voice, Han Jin smiled. If he had known that it was a curse, he would not have been so nervous. In terms of spiritual power, all the masters within the constraints of the law could not be compared with Han Jin. Han Jin was only one step away from truly condensing the immortal golden body. His spiritual power had already reached a level as vast as the sea. It was not something that a third-rate god who had been reduced to the level of a lich could easily shake. Han Jin was afraid that some strange creature would break into his mind. No matter what, Han Jin did not want to use his body as a battlefield. No matter if he won or lost, he would be the one to suffer. The curse of the nether god Staya. It sounded very powerful. Han Jin's smile grew wider and wider. Then he stretched out his right index finger and gently pressed it between his eyebrows. He slowly said, "Clear will of heaven, open." His spiritual power condensed into a point in his sea of consciousness and then exploded. At this moment, Han Jin seemed to hear a scream from his sea of consciousness. Not only Han Jin's sea of consciousness, but the entire white bone plane was also trembling violently. If the spiritual shock released by the god of underworld, Staya, was like a gentle ripple, then the will of heaven that Han Jin had condensed with all of his divine thoughts was like a ferocious spiritual storm. The storm collided with the ripples in the air and immediately burst out with a violent bang. Countless streams of spiritual turbulence burst out in all directions. Even Doreen was like a lonely lily in the wind under this pervasive spiritual attack. Some of the weaker Knight of Terror and Bone Dragons struggled and fell to the ground, while others roared in pain. As for the Lord of the Hills, there was no trace of expression on his fleshless face, but the red light in his empty eye sockets showed that his soul was experiencing an extremely violent impact at this moment. Gradually, the ripples in the air began to retreat, and the coverage of the sea of flowers quickly expanded, wrapping some of the Terror Knight of Terror and Bone Dragons who had not retreated in time. Doreen and Dandin tried their best to retreat. They had already experienced the horror of the hellfire of the Red Lotus, and they did not want to experience it again. Han Jin's fingers quickly drew several complicated handprints in the air. At the same time, he let out a soft cry, and an even more powerful spiritual wave filled the sky above the plane of bones. Indeed, before the first wave had even subsided, the ripples that were already unable to withstand Han Jin's second wave of attacks instantly collapsed. Han Jin, on the other hand, continued to urge the spiritual storm to chase after the ripples, heading straight for the depths of the abandoned land. Condensing the will of heaven with his spiritual will was indeed powerful and could allow him to gain the upper hand in any spiritual battle, but also consumed a lot of energy. If it were another time and another place, Han Jin would have made a different choice. But at this moment, Han Jin had no scruples. This abandoned land did not only belong to the god of the underworld, but also to him, Han Jin. Within a radius of nearly 1,000 meters around Han Jin, soul fires lit up one after another. Some were very weak, like dark stars, while some were very bright, bigger than a human fist. There were even soul fires the size of a wheel. Countless soul fires formed a tide, rushing toward Han Jin from all directions. The karmic fire of the Red Lotus was expanding outwards, while the soul fires were shrinking inwards. The two did not collide, and the scene became even more dazzling. The melting of the soul fires naturally could not escape the senses of the god of the underworld. After the rumbling sound caused by the spiritual storm, the god of the underworld suddenly became silent. After a few breaths, he suddenly roared, "Who are you? Who are you?" The god of the underworld's voice was sharp and trembling, as if he had been greatly stimulated or because of something he was afraid of. He was willing to hide in the depths of the abandoned land because he was afraid that the remaining fragments of the divine spark would become a sweet fruit that would be picked by other gods. But now he could only watch helplessly as his origin turned into a completely different kind of power, and then it was all absorbed by the enemy. This was far beyond what he could bear. It could also be said that the thing he was most afraid of had really happened. Han Jin did not seem to hear the question of the god of the underworld. He closed his eyes slightly and continued to make gestures. In fact, he had never been a person who liked to cause trouble. Although he had been through many trials and tribulations, his nature had not changed much. Just like this time, if Denver had not taken the initiative to attack, he would have returned to the surface. But now, Han Jin really wanted to kill the god of the underworld. Even if the god of the underworld begged for mercy or surrendered, he would completely destroy him. He had accepted too many gifts, and if he wanted to free all the wraiths, god of the underworld, then god of the underworld must die. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 571. Speak. Who the hell are you? The god of the underworld roared once more. Although he knew that it was unlikely for him to get an answer and that it would make others feel that he was showing weakness, he had no choice but to ask because this was too important to him. He even suspected that this was a trap set up by a certain god. Clearly, he was lacking in self-reflection. If he had continued to hide in his lair, how could Han Jin have come knocking on his door? Aren't you one of the gods? Guess for yourself. Han Jin sneered and pressed his fingertip against his forehead again. The divine sense hidden in his sea of consciousness was fully activated. Clear will of heaven. Open. Under Han Jin's control, a violent spiritual storm swept over a kilometer away in an instant. The divine sense condensed into divine sense followed the spiritual trail left behind by the god of the underworld and pursued it relentlessly, rushing straight into the depths of the abandoned land. Han Jin's indestructible avatar did not become indistinct even though it had lost a large amount of vital energy. Instead, it became even clearer as countless soul flames fused into it. Golden light shot out in all directions, and countless simple runes appeared and disappeared around the indestructible avatar. Han Jin's figure was like a real god, standing solemnly in the dazzling light. From the moment Han Jin joined the battle until now, he had almost never moved from his position. Firstly, there was no need. This was his world, and the further his divine sense could travel, the further his attack range would be. Secondly, he had to take care of the greatly weakened Ankiel. To be honest, if Ankiel had not been trapped, Han Jin would have immediately thought of a way to return after destroying the abandoned land. He would settle this account later. He had just touched upon the true meaning of the Great Tao, so he needed to immediately go into seclusion to train. It could also be said that the god of the underworld had brought this upon himself. He had no reason to be angry, nor was he worthy. Could it be that whoever he wanted to kill would have to obediently wait for death? At this time, the god of the underworld, Staya, also made a counterattack. Countless streams of black gas rose from the ground into the sky, like a black rainstorm. They poured into Han Jin's divine sense and crazily drilled into it. The black gas was constantly changing its shape in the vast spiritual waves, faintly showing signs of expanding. It seemed to have an independent consciousness and was as slippery as a fish, always escaping the moment Han Jin was about to catch it. As the black gas continued to increase, the momentum of heavens was finally slowed down. Han Jin could almost hear the painful roars of the black gas as it tangled with heaven's will. So, you, a third-rate god, are nothing more than a demonic person. Han Jin laughed heartily. Next, Han Jin changed the hand seals and heaven's will immediately came to a standstill, starting to slowly revolve in the sky. Under the control of Han Jin, the sea of consciousness, which was originally invisible to the naked eye, unexpectedly showed traces in the sky. An incomparably huge pale white vortex faintly appeared in the sky above the plane of bones. The speed of heaven's will's rotation became faster and faster, and gradually, those vengeful spirits also involuntarily followed it. And under the vortex, countless streams of black gas broke out of the ground and joined in the rotation. In a short few breaths of time, the huge vortex rotating in the sky above the plane of bones gradually changed. Under the control of Han Jin's divine sense, the whole vortex was divided into two distinct parts. One half was a pale white full of boundless vitality, and the other half was pitch black like ink emitting dense, deathly aura. The whole sky seemed to have been occupied by this boundless black and white world, and everyone could feel the simple and dense aura assaulting their senses. Black and white weren't stagnant, but were continuously revolving. The huge abandoned land instantly sank into a deathly stillness, and the undead creatures were stunned by the majestic scene before their eyes. Han Jin unexpectedly used his divine sense to condense an incomparably huge Taiji diagram, and the countless restless, vengeful spirits in this black and white world suddenly became incomparably quiet. At the same time, Sisha's angry roar came from the depths of the abandoned land. "Damn it! What did you do?" The instant the Taiji diagram took shape, Sisha was alarmed to discover that he had suddenly lost contact with those vengeful spirits. This was simply impossible. The spirits that had been personally transformed by Sisha would be branded with a deep imprint, and by relying on the connection of the imprint, Sisha could manipulate them to do anything, including self-detonation. In fact, this was the biggest difference between the god of the underworld and other gods. The most powerful thing about the god of the underworld was not his own divine realm, but his endless undead legion. Toying with those inferior creatures in the palm of his hand was what the god of the underworld liked to do the most before he fell. It was also because he relied too much on these undead creatures that the god of the underworld's divinity was successfully taken away by the god of death. The moment his divinity was taken away, the boundless pain of his soul being torn apart was still engraved in Sisha's mind. Therefore, he had always been treading on thin ice and had never dared to make any big moves, for fear of attracting his old enemy again. The most important thing was that he, who only had a small piece of divinity fragment, was no longer as glorious as he used to be. Not to mention encountering a god. Even if he went up against the Archangel Alpha, Sisha didn't have much of a chance of winning. Sadly, for countless years, Sisha was still walking the same path as before, concentrating on creating undead creatures. But if Han Jin hadn't appeared, as long as Sisha had enough time, he might really be able to transform several heroes into super powerful beings. However, human desires were endless, and gods were no exception. What's more, after living in repression for too long, once they erupted, they might become irrational. After learning that the demon pool had been completely destroyed, the god of the underworld, Sisha, became particularly excited. He believed that it was time for a change, and the original laws were no longer applicable to this plane. However, when the black and white world that shrouded the sky above the bone plane suddenly cut off the spiritual connection between him and the undead creatures, Sisha finally had a long-lost feeling, as if the painful scene of the past was about to happen again. The trembling that came from the depths of his soul stimulated Sisha to the point of madness. Chaotic spiritual waves surged in the sky, but as soon as they got close to the Taiji diagram, these spiritual waves that seemed to carry powerful power would be annihilated in an instant. Yin and Yang flow endlessly. As Han Jin's clear voice echoed in the sky above the bone plane, the whole Taiji diagram expanded several times in an instant, and at the same time began to spin rapidly. The boundary between black and white gradually became unclear, and later, black and white completely merged together, showing a strange scene of flowing and extinguishing. At first glance, the Taiji diagram seemed to have become a huge pitch-black disk, but if one looked carefully, they would find that the disk was actually white, and the black seen before seemed to be an illusion. The strange changes produced by the Taiji diagram caused the whole abandoned land to become somewhat illusory. When the Taiji diagram rotated to the extreme, Han Jin shouted, "Chaos reverse, heaven and earth bloom, open." The whole Taiji diagram exploded with a bang, turning into countless extremely small particles of dust that scattered down. The vengeful spirits no longer existed, and only specks of soul fire floated in the air. The next moment, countless specks of soul fire drew out different trajectories, leaving long flaming tails in the air, and flew toward Han Jin like young swallows returning to their nest. An inexplicable joy suddenly filled the sky. Han Jin allowed these large and small flames to fly towards him, watching them merge into his body. He silently felt the Yuan energy in his body soar, and the light emitted by the invincible golden body behind him became even more dazzling. The feeling of being filled with power did not bring Han Jin the slightest bit of joy. Instead, there was a kind of unbearable heaviness. The moment before the countless vengeful spirits disappeared, that kind of joy was all transformed by Han Jin into boundless killing intent. As if it had sensed Han Jin's undisguised murderous intent, Staya suddenly let out a sharp roar. The entire abandoned land suddenly began to shake, and the ground that was made of white bones began to crack. The thick, lead-colored clouds in the sky seemed as if they would fall at any moment. An extremely oppressive atmosphere filled the entire space. The experts watching the battle did not know the effect of Han Jin's magic, but the god of the underworld, Staya, was incomparably clear. Because of this, he was close to going crazy. If life and death were opposite sides, then what was the opposite side of the eternal land created by the god of the underworld, Staya? It was reincarnation. As long as they came into contact with the dust floating down from the sky, the terrifying night and phantom dragons would fall in droves. It was as if an extremely terrifying infection was spreading rapidly among the undead creatures. Han Jin had killed many undead creatures before, but he had always used his invincible power to destroy the bodies of the undead creatures, causing the soul fire to lose its support. However, this gentle and invisible Tao was far more terrifying than the forceful Tao. Including the bodies of the Terror Knights and the Phantom Dragons, all the skeletons within a radius of several thousand meters were rapidly rotting and disintegrating. In the end, the skeletons even turned into fertile soil. Perhaps this transformation would take tens of thousands of years to complete, but in less than 10 seconds, the entire world had gone through a cycle of reincarnation. If it was just killing the undead creatures, Staya would not care at all. But at this moment, the enemy seemed to be transforming his abandoned land. If he did not stop it, he would lose his foundation. Sensing that the god of the underworld was about to fight to the death, Han Jin sneered. After several spiritual confrontations, Han Jin had already successfully locked onto Staya's position. His figure suddenly turned into a stream of light and shot into the depths of the abandoned land at an extreme speed. Dandin and Doreen immediately launched an attack. Several crescent-shaped light blades shot out from the bowstring in Doreen's hand, while Dandin waved his giant axe and shot towards Han Jin like a cannonball. Before the light blades shot out by Doreen could get close to Han Jin, they disappeared without a trace in the dazzling golden light. Dandin had just raised his arm, but before he could make a chopping motion, Han Jin had already made a gesture and shouted, "Overseer, seal!" A rapidly expanding glow appeared in the sky above Dandin. It immediately turned into a glowing seal and slammed down on Dandin. The seal covered an area of hundreds of meters. If it was compared to a fly swatter, then Dandin, as a dwarf, was much smaller than a fly. He could not dodge at all and could only watch as his vision was covered by the brilliance. The next moment, the seal fell straight down and heavily hit the ground. The bone plane shook violently. Needless to say, the terrifying knight who was hit by the seal, the nearby knights could not help but fly up into the air. Countless broken bones also sputtered crazily, and a tsunami of smoke and dust rolled in all directions. A hole of hundreds of meters in diameter was left on the ground. The moment the seal disappeared, the surrounding bones rolled inwards and buried Dandin, who was unknown whether he was alive or dead. Doreen was still releasing crescent-shaped light blades. Logically speaking, when she saw Dandin's fate, she should immediately retreat and continue to attack Han Jin. But Han Jin ignored Doreen and continued to fly forward. This was the use of reputation. Although Dandin was one of the 4 heroes, he had used despicable means to kill Abraham and Doreen, which made him notorious. Such a guy was certainly not worthy of sympathy. But Doreen was a little special. Han Jin had other ideas in mind, so he did not specifically attack Doreen. Everything in the abandoned land was within Dandin's perception. Looking at Han Jin's cold smile, Dandin's heart trembled for no reason. He could not tell why, but he knew that the time to choose between life and death had come. Dandin recited an obscure spell, and the abandoned land shook even more violently. At this moment, what Dandin needed the most was time. As long as he was given a few more minutes, he would be able to complete the spell. However, in the face of Han Jin's amazing speed, Dandin's small wish was doomed to fail. After a few breaths, a tall altar appeared in front of Han Jin's eyes. But to his surprise, there was only a figure sitting on a throne on the altar. Han Jin was sure that the violent mental fluctuations just now came from here. Before Han Jin arrived, he once again launched his divine sense. The figure issued a harsh scream, and countless ripples appeared in the air, intercepting the mental storm released by Hanjin. What was even more strange was that if one listened carefully, one could hear that the scream was composed of two different voices. At this moment, Hanjin naturally had no time to think about this. He only knew that he had to kill the guy on the throne, regardless of whether he was a human or a god. Although the mental storm released by Hanjin was blocked by the ripples in the air, he obviously had the advantage. The fluctuations were like bubbles in front of the mental storm. However, Hanjin also felt a little strange. The figure did not seem to have any other means of attack. He was just desperately releasing mental attacks one after another. Wisps of black mist rose from the ruins of the altar and condensed into a figure that was nearly 100 meters tall. The true face of the figure could not be seen under the shroud of the mist. Only a deafening sound that was loud enough to tear one's eardrums could be heard. Damn it, you actually forced me to use the power of my origin. My grandmother is critically ill. She's already an old woman in her 80s. Although I am somewhat prepared, I still can't accept it. My younger brother will go tomorrow, and I may leave in the morning of the day after tomorrow. I will ask for leave in advance. I hope everyone can forgive me. P.S. I won't miss tomorrow's update. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 572. Be careful. There's no turning back now. Hanjin smiled. Although the smile on his face was very natural, his heart was in turmoil. In the blink of an eye, the energy fluctuations emitted by the god of the underworld, Staya, had increased by more than 10 times. Only now did he truly understand that the god of the underworld, Staya, had not used his true strength all this time. To put more clearly, Staya was using Denver's body to fight, and he was also consuming Denver's strength. In the end, when he found that he was no match for Hanjin, he was forced to release his own origin. It could be seen that the god of the underworld, Staya, cherished himself very much. If he had any other choice, he would never let himself fall into a dangerous situation. And this kind of nature often tended to go from one extreme to the other. When the situation was uncertain, he would always be too conservative. Once he was under great pressure, he would become too crazy. Despicable bastard, you'd better worry about yourself. From the 100-meter tall, rolling and expanding smoke-like figure came a roar that could make even the heavens and earth tremble. Then, 2 gray beams of light shot out and shrouded Hanjin in a crisscross pattern. Ankiel, who could not help but rush over to watch the battle, held her breath in horror. What she witnessed was a magic that only existed in the age of gods, eternal gaze. The beam of light itself should not have any impact, but Hanjin felt like he had been hit head-on by a cannonball. Together with his invincible avatar, he was thrown back. The golden light that enveloped Hanjin was also constantly trembling and twisting. Because of the angle, Hanjin flew more than 100 meters away before slamming heavily on the ground. However, the remaining momentum did not dissipate. He tumbled all the way, and his invincible avatar rolled along with him. Countless bones tumbled up one after another or splashed into the sky. When Hanjin finally stabilized himself, he had actually plowed a trench more than 100 meters across the plain of bones. Ankiel immediately unleashed her deep blue domain. No matter how powerful the enemy was, she had to buy time for Hanjin to catch his breath. But before Anzer could make a move, Hanjin had already jumped up. Don't be fooled by the commotion just now. Hanjin wasn't injured at all. It was only because he was in the air and had nowhere to borrow strength from. So he couldn't resist the power contained in eternal gaze. Hanjin's indestructible golden body was close to completion. Even if a zenith heaven descended to the mortal world, it would take a lot of effort to destroy him. Moreover, the god of the underworld, Staya, was just a fragment of a divinity. You want to see who is bigger? Hanjin raised his eyebrows. He was about to use his invincible avatar to fight back when he suddenly found that something was wrong. The golden light that enveloped him was a little dim, and countless faint dust was floating out of his body. His physical strength and divine sense were gradually weakening, as if his strength was being taken away by the dust and then disappeared without a trace. Eternal gaze was the most terrible curse of the god of the underworld, Staya. Even if he escaped to another plane, even if he was lucky enough to experience thousands of reincarnations, he would not be able to avoid the gaze of the god of the underworld. The gaze would only end if everything completely disappeared. Hanjin only stood in silence for a moment before he understood what had happened. He let out a light sigh and said, "You are forcing me." Before he could finish his sentence, the invincible golden body quickly started to form a spell. Of course, the god of the underworld, Staya, wouldn't give Hanjin a chance. He slowly pulled his huge hands apart, and in the next moment, 2 black electric arcs flew out from his palms and formed a line in the middle. It seemed that the electric arc was very unstable, constantly twisting into all kinds of strange shapes. Then, the god of the underworld pushed his hands outwards, and the electric arc quickly rolled towards Hanjin. At this time, the invincible avatar had already shot out a white light, and then it began to make a gesture. As for the electric arc that was flying closer and closer, Hanjin didn't seem to see it, or maybe he didn't care if he saw it. An inconceivable scene unfolded before his eyes. The electric arc shot forward at a speed of 1,000 meters in the blink of an eye, but it was still a dozen meters away from Hanjin. If Hanjin used magic to scatter, defeat, or block the electric arc, it wouldn't be strange. The problem was that Hanjin was still motionless, and the electric arc kept shooting forward without slowing down. Enkiel, who was watching the battle, was stunned. When she focused on Hanjin, she saw that Hanjin was motionless, and the electric arc was a dozen meters away from Hanjin, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. When she focused on the electric arc, she saw that it kept rolling forward. Why was it that the same pair of eyes could see 2 completely different scenes? Which one was real, and which one was fake? It seemed as if 2 planes were inexplicably overlapping. In one plane, Hanjin and Nether God Staya were only a few hundred meters apart, and in the other plane, Hanjin and Nether God Staya were separated by thousands of kilometers. They were so far away, yet so close at the same time. This made Enkiel's heart feel extremely complicated. Not only was Enkiel stunned, but Nether God Staya was also at a loss as to what to do. He silently watched as the electric arc futilely chased forward. After no less than a few minutes, the electric arc's power finally weakened, and a series of black sparks appeared before disappearing without a trace. If they weren't enemies, Staya might have abandoned his self-esteem and tried every possible means to ask what kind of magic that was. This kind of unclear and unexplainable scene had a huge impact on the fallen god Staya. He had already realized that it might be a completely new kind of power that wasn't inferior to that of a god. My turn. In a few minutes, the invincible golden body had already transformed into thousands of spells. A sneer appeared at the corner of Han Jin's mouth. "Staya, that's your name, isn't it? I want to know what you will rely on to survive after losing the Forsaken Land." Then, Han Jin raised his hands and pressed them down. The moment the golden light emerged, it enveloped the entire abandoned land. Countless undead creatures let out painful wails as they were shrouded in the golden light. All the ghost dragons and bone dragons soaring in the sky fell down at the same time. The Knights of Terror raised their hands in an attempt to block the painful rays. Unfortunately, the golden light didn't have any source of light, so it naturally didn't have any direction. It filled every corner like a stream of water. They could block that side, but they couldn't block this side, accepting the melting of the soul fire time and time again. Han Jin's power rose several times. However, Han Jin didn't want to finish this step. His final enemy was the Archangel Alpha, who controlled the law, not the god of the underworld in front of him. But at this moment, he had no other choice. In fact, With the invincible golden body, Hanjin wasn't afraid of any offensive magic. With the invincible golden body, he could cope with all kinds of changes. But a curse that had reached the divine level gave him an incomparable headache. It even reminded him of the terrible ancient poisons of the legendary era. Once bitten, even the celestial sage couldn't resist. At least, he had no way to remove the eternal gaze, so he could only kill the other party and destroy the last mark of the god of the underworld, Staya. Golden lotuses appeared around Hanjin, slowly blooming and condensing together. Finally, they formed a shining lotus platform that lifted Hanjin up in the air. The huge figure of the god of the underworld, Staya, slowly shrank back a few steps. Hanjin could easily destroy a large number of undead creatures by releasing a single lotus. Even Dandin and Doreen were injured. What would happen if so many lotuses bloomed together? But he had no chance to stop it. He could only wait silently for the change. If it's all you've got, Staya, when these 108 lotuses fall, it will be the time of your downfall. Hanjin softly said, "Red lotus, bloom." The lotus platform under Hanjin's feet suddenly exploded, and beams of light shot out in all directions. The light beams shot into the sky, and countless cracks appeared in the sky, revealing black lines. That was the color of the sky of the Abyss world. The light beams fell on the ground, and the white bone plane disappeared layer by layer, as if a huge scythe was constantly scraping the ground. The light beams fell on the phantom dragon and the terrifying knight. No matter if they were dozens of meters tall, hundreds of meters tall, or as tall as an ordinary person, they were all blown away like straw. But the light beams were not the most terrifying thing. Then, the petals expanded at a speed that exceeded the limit and covered every corner of the world. The undead creatures were still in the air, and their bodies began to disintegrate. The more undead creatures there were, the more powerful Hanjin's achievements would be. Countless soul fires of various sizes began to surge toward Hanjin the moment they appeared. Because there were so many of them, in Ankiel's eyes, the whole world seemed to be shrinking toward Hanjin. Her mind was also affected by the joy that almost condensed into water, and she almost rushed toward Hanjin involuntarily. The god of the underworld, Staya, roared and struggled, but under the all-pervasive attack, he could only protect himself, but he was powerless to protect the abandoned land. Finally, the abandoned land began to collapse. The world changed in the blink of an eye, and almost everything in the abandoned land disappeared. The god of the underworld, Staya, was still alive. Dante was almost a pile of broken bones, but he was still wriggling. Doreen, on the other hand, was unharmed. She stood there in a daze, as if she did not know what to do. She was not hurt because Hanjin did not want to hurt her, just like Ankiel. As for the god of the underworld, Dante, and the great lich, Dante, had disappeared along with the abandoned land. The Dark Dragon King, Fan London, appeared nearby. He looked at Hanjin, who was standing in the air with his eyes closed, and then looked at the dumbfounded Ankiel. He hesitated for a moment, then took a few steps forward. Hanjin suddenly opened his eyes, and his gaze fell on the restless Fan London. In fact, Hanjin did not say anything, but Fan London felt as if there was a clap of thunder in his ears. Hanjin's golden eyes seemed to have an invisible force, and Fan London groaned and took a few steps back. Fan London then immediately turned around and fled into the distance without looking back. Hanjin's face was solemn. He did not look at the escaping Fan London, nor did he look at the god of the underworld, Staya. He only raised his head and looked at the dark sky. He did not want to come to this step too quickly, but there was no other way. A terrible storm was about to begin. At this moment, he had become an immortal, and the only thing he lacked was the final tempering. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 573. Lowly trash. Do you think you could defeat me like this? You're still far from it. The roar of the god of the underworld, Staya, reverberated throughout the sulfur plains. Waves of pressure spread out in all directions, and countless rocks were swept up into the air. Near the god of the underworld, a few rocks that were as tall as a person were uprooted and rolled past Han Jin's feet with a heavy rumbling sound. Lowly, Han Jin smiled, but he wasn't in the mood to argue. His immortal golden body was feeling more and more pressure, and this pressure didn't come from the god of underworld Staya. Among all the powerhouses present, only Han Jin knew what it was. The laws are about to be replaced. From now on, I, the god of the underworld, will become the only ruler of this plane. The god of the underworld slowly raised his two huge arms, and his hands seemed to have already touched the ground. I have to admit that you already have the power of a god. If time could be turned back to the era of the gods, you would have the right to carve your name on a mountain of faith and occupy your own realm, but it's a pity that this place already belongs to me. The sky above the god of the underworld seemed to have been corroded, and a huge hole appeared. Following that, an image appeared in the hole. If Sunir was here, she would definitely recognize it immediately. It was the entrance to the illusion of the temple. A lich slowly walked out under the protection of dozens of terrifying night. In his hands was a tray with a necklace, and in the middle of the necklace was a small skull. The god of the underworld, Staya, had always been suppressed by Han Jin, but he suddenly dared to speak so arrogantly. It was obvious that his confidence came from that image. "Don't take it too hard, Staya," Han Jin said indifferently. Tens of thousands of years have already passed, and the gods who have grasped the true essence of power will not stay in the same place forever. As far as I know, the god of death, Hamas, is countless times more powerful than you. Even if you really occupy this plane, you will only be a pitiful worm living in fear all day long. Am I right? Staya, you've fallen too far behind. Han Jin had always doubted the true power of the gods. Even the projection of the god of death, Hamas, could produce such a strong fluctuation. He had no doubt that if the god of death really came, he could easily destroy the whole world with a wave of his hand. This contradicted the legends. The so-called era of gods referred to the chaotic era where fierce conflicts constantly broke out between the gods. Moreover, many gods had fallen in the wars. According to the calculations of death god Hamas, the continent should have been destroyed countless times, and not even dregs would be left. When the gods were still alive, they might have some misgivings, but at the moment of death, who would care so much? The evaluation of Han Jin by the god of death, Staya, could be regarded as a wake-up call. In other words, the era of gods was the era where the self-cultivators fought for supremacy. Of course, at that time, the gods were much more powerful than the self-cultivators in the general sense. When the flames of war died down, the surviving gods received the power of their companions, which made them even more powerful, enough to open up new worlds and new planes. In other words, they were similar to Han Jin at the moment, grasping the final essence. As for those powerful artifacts and the heaven hidden behind the gate of heaven, they were nothing special. Han Jin was confident that as long as he could get through this hurdle, he could make powerful artifacts of equal power. He could also turn his mustard seed space into another heaven in a short time. Between immortals and mortals, there was an unimaginable qualitative gap. Even if he killed the god of death, Staya, he was still immortal. No matter what he could do or what kind of opponent he could defeat, it was meaningless. Only by getting through the final tempering could he become an immortal. Han Jin also knew that he had to face this gap head-on. It was like a suckling baby racing with an adult. As time passed, the baby gradually learned to crawl, walk, and then trot. Although his speed was constantly approaching that of the adult, it was difficult to shorten the distance that had been opened up because he could never surpass his opponent. When the baby finally learned to run one day, the adult might have already begun to fly. In fact, Han Jin's words to Staya had no malice because the two of them were standing on the same starting line. It was just that Han Jin was a latecomer, while Staya was bent on restoring his former glory and even wanted to take revenge. They could be regarded as fellow sufferers sympathizing with each other. However, The pity in Han Jin's words was something that Staya could not accept. Pitiful worm? You'd better pity yourself. Staya roared, and then his voice suddenly lowered, uttering a series of strange ravings. The lich holding the tray paused. He held the tray in front of him with one hand, then stretched out his other hand, and with his snow-white, bony fingertips, reached into the mouth of the skull necklace and pulled out something. Stop! A heavy, cold, and oppressive voice suddenly sounded. Not only the lich, but also the god of the underworld, Staya, and Han Jin, who were both in the abyss world, were dumbfounded. The tray in the lich's hand fell down, but at this time his bony fingertips had already pulled out a shiny thing from the mouth of the skull necklace. Holy crystal! Han Jin was shocked. That skull necklace obviously belonged to the god of death, Staya. How could there be a holy crystal hidden in it? A white light poured down from the lich's head. Due to the angle, Staya and Han Jin couldn't see what was happening. They could only see a thick fog of light engulfing the lich in the blink of an eye. Archangel Alpha? It's too late. It's too late. Staya laughed wildly, for he had enough reason to lose his composure. For many years, the god of the underworld, Staya, had not dared to appear on the surface. Otherwise, he would have alarmed the Archangel Alpha. He also did not dare to appear in the abyss world. If he was targeted by the minions of the god of death, his end would be miserable. Until today, he could finally be completely free. Heaven's will. Han Jin breathed a long sigh of relief. At this moment, an indescribable feeling arose in the hearts of the two powerhouses. Enchantment stared blankly at the image in the sky, and suddenly a voice rang in her ears. Leave this place immediately, and take Doreen with you. Enchantment was stunned, and she immediately turned to Doreen's position. She found that Doreen had been tied up by a black rope and was struggling nonstop. Without hesitation, Enchantment rushed to Doreen and grabbed her neck as if she was holding a wooden stick. Undead creatures didn't need to breathe anyway, so she didn't have to worry. The god of the underworld, Staya, was still laughing maniacally. He didn't care that Enchantment had taken away his divine servant. The entire plane belonged to him now. No matter where Enchantment fled to, she would never be able to escape from his grasp. At this moment, the image above Staya's head changed again. A thick cloud of black smoke quietly rose, and the light emitted by Archangel Alpha quickly faded away. A world of black and white appeared in front of everyone's eyes. Against the backdrop of darkness, Alpha's figure was exceptionally clear. The pairs of wings of light seemed endless, and even extended beyond the horizon. He wasn't very tall, but perhaps to Alpha, who had mastered the laws of nature, size no longer mattered. He held a 2-meter-long greatsword condensed from light in his hand. Because the dazzling light had been absorbed by the black smoke, everyone could clearly see the countless runes engraved on the greatsword. In terms of appearance, Archangel Alpha was almost identical to the Angels of Light. His body was made of solidified light, and he didn't have a face, only a silhouette. The only difference was that he had more and longer wings of light. However, the pressure he exuded was so substantial that it was transmitted to the abyss through the image released by Staya. As for the lich and the dozens of terrifying night, they all disappeared. Without any external force, the skull necklace that had fallen off the ground suddenly floated up on its own and flew into the sky at an extremely fast speed. At the same time, Archangel Alpha's figure moved at lightning speed and chased after it. No one could compare with Alpha's speed, not even Catherine, who could travel 1,000 meters in a breath. In just a moment, Alpha had left the range of the image of Staya. Some of the people on the ground saw a shocking scene. First, a mass of black light flew through the sky, and after the black light, the world gradually became pitch black. People could no longer see the sky, the earth, or each other, or even themselves. The birds held onto the branches in fear and trembled, while the beasts, regardless of whether they were eating grass or meat, were all lying motionlessly on the ground, using their fear to sense the suddenly unfamiliar world. Cities and villages were swallowed by the darkness one after another. Cries for help, and curses were mixed together, forming a prelude to collapse. Even the fish that lived freely in the rivers and rivers couldn't bear this sudden change. Some jumped desperately into the air, then fell, and then jumped up again, as if they could see again if they tried harder. Some rushed around in the water. Even if they hit the rocks and bled, they still didn't care. In the next moment, people could see again. An angel with huge wings of light shot out. The endless darkness could almost devour everything, but it couldn't devour the light of Archangel Alpha. Therefore, people couldn't even see themselves, but they could see Alpha's figure drifting by like a comet. "You are so lucky, you know. You will be the only witness." Staya became more and more emotional, and then began to chant an ancient spell. Hanjin didn't move, with a sarcastic smile on the corner of his mouth, waiting silently. Everyone thought that they would be the final winner, but the problem was that there could only be one winner. Staya spread out his hands, and the space in front of him suddenly split. To be precise, it split into 13 fragments. Those fragments seemed to be extremely flexible. They sometimes rolled into a ball, sometimes twisted into a strip. Those fragments also seemed to be extremely sharp. They cut through the hard dome of the earth without any hindrance and flew straight up. When one of the fragments flew past Hanjin, it suddenly engulfed Hanjin and the indestructible golden body and imprinted them deeply. If the fragment was a painting, then Hanjin had become a character in the painting. Layer after layer of the dome of the earth was pierced through like tofu. In just a few seconds, the fragments of the space had flown to the surface of the earth, and then, in a roar that shook the world, they gathered together. "Welcome to my divine realm." The voice of the god of the underworld, Staya, became even more excited. "Although you can destroy my forsaken land, you can't destroy my origin. When my origin gathers together, when my mark finds me, the law will begin to reverse." Hanjin's figure appeared between heaven and earth. Although his body was distorted badly just now, in fact, he was not hurt. Every fragment of the space was an abandoned land, and the world inside it was very big. However, the abandoned land that had been fused together had undergone tremendous changes. There was no sky here, nor were there piles of bones. There were only tens of thousands of wraith that were struggling and roaring. They were like an all-pervasive tide that covered every corner of the land. Countless resentful spirits pounced on the indestructible golden body and tore it apart crazily. However, their power was still relatively weak, and they couldn't affect the indestructible golden body at all. The skull necklace suddenly fell from the sky and flew straight toward the nether god Staya. In the next moment, the figure of the Archangel Alpha also penetrated this world of wraiths. The moment he appeared, he locked onto the figure of the nether god Staya. Then, he waved his lightsaber, and a huge beam of light tore through the obstruction of thousands of wraiths and hit the nether god Staya. Hanjin raised his eyebrows slightly. He knew that the Archangel Alpha was a pure combat angel, but he didn't expect Alpha's attack to be so fast. The huge beam of light seemed to have exceeded his line of sight. The moment he saw Alpha raise his hand, Staya had been blasted away. "It's useless, Alpha. Although you control the power of the law, you are just a puppet." The voice of the god of the underworld, Staya, spread out from every piece of mist and condensed into a chorus with echoes. "And I am one of the creators of the law." In the next moment, the scattered mist gathered together again. The Archangel Alpha didn't seem to be good at expressing his feelings, or he was too lazy to speak. He raised his hand and waved his light sword again. Every time Alpha released his sword, a destructive storm would roll up in Staya's divine realm, and even the divine realm was stirred up beyond recognition. However, his attack didn't seem to be able to hurt Staya. It was like a person waving a sword at the air. No matter how hard he tried, the air would eventually merge back together. After a few breaths, Alpha stopped attacking, and Staya, who had reformed, let out a strange laugh. "Figured it out? Sigh. It's not good to be ignored." Hanjin suddenly interjected, pointing at the tip of his nose with his finger. Here, look here. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chijian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 574. Both underworld god Staya and Archangel Alpha looked at Hanjin. After all, the former had fought with Hanjin and understood his strength, while the latter didn't know who Hanjin was. He only glanced at Hanjin, then turned around and pointed the light sword in his hand at Staya. Archangel Alpha was in charge of heaven, and his responsibility was only to protect the laws and maintain the balance and stability of the plane. He wasn't a spy satellite, and he couldn't clearly know everything that happened in the world. Only when some kind of burst of power caused an impact on the laws, or when there was an uneasy fluctuation in heaven, would he open his pair of divine eyes. You only found an incomplete divine domain, yet you dare to talk nonsense about overturning the laws? Staya, don't deceive yourself. Along with Alpha's voice, a pure white beam of light suddenly fell from the sky, faintly containing a solemn hymn. Dazzling golden radiances were like naughty little fairies, fluttering inside and outside the beam of light. Those overwhelming specters, whether they were shrouded by the beam of light or touched by the golden radiances, were all turned into ashes in an instant. And Alpha's figure seemed to become more solid under the illumination of the beam of light, and his wings of light extended over a kilometer, unexpectedly emitting a dazzling brilliance like a crystal. Staya stared blankly, as if he had seen something inconceivable. Bright discipline? How could you? Alpha's face was still hidden in the light, and his expression couldn't be seen. Only a low voice was transmitted. The glory of God is everywhere. Let the sword in my hand wash away all the evil in this world. Alpha's body suddenly shone with a dazzling brilliance, and countless white rays of light shot out in all directions. Like the rising sun, those rays pierced through the heavy fog, stirring up Staya's divine domain. The fierce rays of light not only annihilated the specters in the surroundings, but even Staya's body was penetrated by the rays of light. Like a broken sieve, his body was covered with large and small holes, but after a short time, he returned to his original state. I got it. Sisha, who had been standing there in a daze, suddenly shouted excitedly. So it's you, the god of light. That fool actually left you in this plane, ha. Alpha did not say a word. What answered Sisha was the huge sword in his hand. With a sweep of the sword, Sisha's body, which had just condensed, was blown apart. However, Sisha's sharp laughter was still echoing in the mist. Alpha, you'll never get out of here. Alpha kept swinging his greatsword, wiping out waves of vengeful spirits. Although the Angel of Light could destroy thousands of vengeful spirits with every swing of his sword, the number of vengeful spirits seemed endless. They still filled every corner of Alpha's body. The battle had fallen into a stalemate. Every time Sisha condensed his body, Alpha would immediately launch an attack to disperse him. However, no matter how fierce the attack was, it seemed that it could not cause any harm to Sisha in this space. The two were fighting fiercely. Unexpectedly, no one paid attention to Hanjin, who was standing on the side. Only those densely packed specters were still crazily tearing at the immortal gilded body. Hanjin, who was ignored, was stunned for a moment. He shrugged his shoulders, then slowly stretched out his right hand. A golden talisman appeared in his hand. Suddenly, a huge and incomparable aura spread out. The talisman fluttered in the air as if there was an invisible hand below holding it. The talisman looked very delicate. Under the flow of light, mysterious and simple seal characters were constantly flickering on it. The moment the talisman appeared, the specters that had surrounded Hanjin so tightly seemed to have been greatly frightened. One after another, they scrambled to escape. In the blink of an eye, a large empty space appeared around Hanjin. None of the wraiths dared to come within 100 meters of the talisman. It was just a small talisman, but it brought them an innate fear that came from the depths of their souls. Sisha and Alpha simultaneously discovered the abnormality. They quickly turned their heads to look at Hanjin. "What is that?" Sisha's eyes flickered. She asked in bewilderment. Although Alpha did not speak, his eyes remained fixed on the talisman in the air. He was unwilling to move even half an inch. Elemental fluctuations could not be felt from the talisman. There was no aura related to darkness. It also did not belong to light magic. However, it exuded a majestic might that was as heavy as a mountain. A sense of danger rose in the hearts of Sktia and Alpha at the same time, and they both involuntarily took a step back. "Cough, the two of you are having so much fun. It is rude of me to disturb you." Hanjin chuckled. His 10 fingers fluttered like butterflies, quickly changing into all kinds of seals. "However, I have no other choice. I really have no other choice." Sisha and Alpha looked at each other. Although they did not understand the meaning behind Hanjin's words, they were certain that the sense of danger in their hearts was growing stronger. One wants to protect the source of her power, while the other wants to subvert it. "Are you deliberately ignoring me because I am powerless to shake the laws? Then, how about some seasoning that surpasses the laws?" Hanjin's rapidly dancing hands came to an abrupt stop. In a moment of stillness, Sisha's divine domain also seemed to have stagnated. The tens of millions of wraiths all turned into statues. "This was originally my tempering. I am sorry for involving the two of you. However, I also have a feeling of schadenfreude. How should I explain this? Am I born to be a bad person?" Sisha was the first to be unable to restrain herself. She raised her hands, and dozens of black gas shot towards Hanjin like poisonous snakes. The indestructible avatar behind Hanjin took a step forward to meet the attack. When the black gas hit the indestructible avatar, the sound of metal colliding rang out. The indestructible avatar swayed slightly, forcibly withstanding Sisha's attack. At this time, Alpha could no longer ignore Hanjin. He suddenly attacked, and a thick sword light shot out at an unparalleled speed. The target of the attack was the talisman floating in the air. In Alpha's opinion, this small talisman was much more terrifying than Hanjin himself. When Alpha's sword light was about to hit the talisman, Hanjin had already finished what he was doing. He looked at Alpha and smiled. Too late. At the same time as Hanjin spoke, the talisman in the air suddenly exploded, turning into countless obscure golden runes that drifted between heaven and earth. The powerful sword light that Alpha sent out disappeared in the dazzling runes that filled the sky. All of a sudden, the indestructible golden body rapidly expanded. Under Hanjin's unscrupulous increase in vital energy, the indestructible golden body had turned into a giant golden statue that was thousands of meters tall within a short period of time. Before Alpha and Sisha could recover from the strange change, the space formed by countless vengeful spirits changed again. A slowly rotating blue vortex suddenly appeared in the sky above Sisha's divine realm. Countless blue electric lights wandered around the vortex, and the moment the vortex appeared, all the vengeful spirits that were originally there disappeared without a trace, as if they had never existed. The god of the underworld, Sktia, could hardly believe his eyes. This was his divine realm. Without his permission, other than the Archangel Alpha, who had mastered the law, no power could penetrate it. This was undoubtedly contempt for his authority. Alpha and Sisha finally knew where the sense of danger in their hearts came from. It wasn't Hanjin, nor was it the mysterious talisman. It was the slowly rotating vortex in the sky that seemed to have a life of its own. They naturally didn't know what the vortex was, but Hanjin knew very well that it was the tribulation cloud that all practitioners feared like a tiger. At the same time, they were willing to endure it. Without going through the final tempering of the tribulation cloud, one couldn't take the final step. Therefore, even if there was only a 1,000th chance, practitioners would still rush forward like moths to a flame. After the tribulation cloud appeared, Hanjin quickly sat down and looked down as if he didn't care about what was happening around him. In fact, this was all Hanjin could do. Han Jin wasn't sure whether the Hongmeng demon refining formation could withstand the heavenly tribulation. Fortunately, Alpha and Sisha, two heaven-defying guys, were here. They should be able to distract the tribulation cloud's attention. As for what would happen to the two of them, Han Jin didn't care. As the saying goes, it's better to die than to die. This was an irrefutable truth since ancient times. The tribulation cloud had been slowly rotating there, as if something was brewing. At this time, the countless golden runes that filled the entire space outlined a strange formation in the air. In an instant, Sisha suddenly found that he could no longer command the ghost that belonged to him. Streaks of pale, golden ripples surged back and forth in the air, washing away all the vengeful souls in their path, leaving only specks of soul fire floating in the air. The soul fire cheered and jumped in joy, pouring toward Han Jin like a river flowing backward. With the influx of countless soul fire, the indestructible golden body behind Han Jin became more solid. Huge golden ancient seals emerged on the indestructible golden body one after another, and dreamy green smoke spiraled around it, setting off the indestructible golden body to be as tall and majestic as a god. Sisha suddenly flew back. His cautious nature made him make a wise choice. Perhaps the heavenly tribulation couldn't shake a real god, but for him who only had a small piece of Godhead fragment, it was enough to be fatal. However, as Han Jin said, it was too late. The moment the Grand Mist Demon refining array took shape, the fate of Sisha and Alpha had already been firmly tied to Han Jin. The only difference was that Han Jin had an endless supply of soul fire to replenish his karma, while they had nothing. After a few breaths, Sisha was horrified to find that no matter what he did, he couldn't escape from the square inch under his feet. Although with his speed, he should have run at least 100 miles away in this period of time. In fact, the distance between him and Han Jin hadn't changed at all. Sisha's strange movements attracted Alpha's attention. In Alpha's eyes, Sisha stretched out his arms and made an incomparably standard flying movement. The mist emitted from his body also seemed to be blown away by the wind pressure brought about by his rapid flight. However, Alpha clearly saw that Sisha had never left his original position. Suddenly, Alpha brandished his sword and slashed at Han Jin from afar. An even stranger scene appeared. A white sword light flew rapidly in the air, even bringing with it a sharp whistle, but it couldn't cross the distance of more than 10 meters. It was as if the space had been stretched infinitely at this moment. At this moment, the tribulation cloud above everyone's head changed color again. Tiny blue lightning flashed with a little purple light, making the whole tribulation cloud appear extremely beautiful. Han Jin still sat there motionless like a statue. The karma provided by the soul fire was so strong that Han Jin's skin shone with a metallic luster. His whole body emitted a golden brilliance. Alpha and Sisha stopped moving at this time. Since they couldn't escape, they could only wait and see. The tribulation cloud in the sky began to boil fiercely. The blue lightning swimming in it became thicker and thicker. A huge pressure, so heavy that it was almost suffocating, filled the whole space. Even Alpha, who had mastered the law, and Sisha, who was once a god, felt a little powerless under this indescribable pressure. In the next moment, 3 huge purple lightning flashes flew out from the center of the tribulation cloud. Almost at the same time, they flashed and fell on the 3 people in the field. Of course, the target of the lightning tribulation didn't include Alpha and Sisha. It only attacked the primordial demon refining array that provided a barrier for Han Jin. Alpha and Sisha were involved in it and were implicated. An extremely violent explosion sounded, and the whole space trembled. When the tribulation lightning fell on the indestructible golden body, Han Jin's face turned pale at first. Then it quickly turned red. However, under the constant replenishment of the soul fire, Han Jin quickly returned to normal. The power of the vengeful spirits was too weak. The tribulation cloud didn't care about such an existence at all, creating an opportunity for Han Jin. If Sisha's divine realm didn't have such a huge number of vengeful spirits, Hanjin really wouldn't dare to make such a desperate move. Unfortunately, Alpha and Sisha didn't know Hanjin's purpose. Otherwise, the two of them would have put down everything in their hands and joined forces to kill Hanjin first. Under the bombardment of the tribulation lightning, Sisha scattered into countless smoke. However, unlike when he was scattered by Alpha, he let out a mournful roar. It was a pain that came from the depths of his soul. Sisha could clearly feel that he was almost completely annihilated. If it weren't for the fact that he was in the divine realm, he was afraid that he would never be able to condense his body again. However, he was powerless to stop all of this from happening because he could not go anywhere within the range of the Grand Mist Demon refining matrix. Even if he wanted to harden his heart and fight Hanjin to the death, he would not have the chance to do so. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 577. On Alpha's back, the wings of light extending over a kilometer were clearly damaged. It seemed that the lightning tribulation had also caused a lot of damage to the Angel of Light, but compared to Staya, Alpha was still a lot stronger. The only one who seemed to be unscathed was Hanjin, sitting there with a calm expression, as if he was meditating in his room and not undergoing the tribulation. Of course, the calmer Hanjin was, the more furious Alpha and Staya became. What the hell was that? Staya, who had just condensed his body, let out a furious roar. Any elemental energy would inevitably be restricted as long as it penetrated his divine domain. Even the Angel of Authority Alpha was unable to release his full strength. If they had fought outside of his divine domain, the previous bright discipline would very possibly have caused him serious injuries. But here he was safe and sound. For this reason, he couldn't understand what kind of power was that, to be able to tear apart his laws and run amok in his divine domain. No one answered, and Alpha was similarly clueless, while Hanjin didn't have the time to pay attention to him. At this moment, Hanjin was seizing every second to receive the last blessings of the soul fire. Every bit of power was equal to a bit of hope. Staya was increasingly unable to restrain his anger, completely forgetting the fact that he couldn't attack Hanjin. Slowly raising his hands, he was about to launch a fierce attack at Hanjin when the tribulation clouds in the sky flared up once again. Noticing the strange phenomenon in the sky, Staya couldn't help but let out a strange cry, no longer caring about attacking Hanjin. Waving his hands repeatedly, a black fog gushed out from his fingertips, wrapping his whole body. At this time, Alpha had already folded the wings of light on his back, covering himself like two huge palms. On the wings of light, countless bright runes flickered at high speed, looking as dazzling as the stars in the night sky. After a short time, these starlights converged together, forming a dazzling pillar of light soaring to the sky. Accompanied by a deep and solemn hymn from Alpha's mouth, it shot straight towards the center of the tribulation clouds. Inwardly, Sisha rejoiced. If it weren't for the fact that he was afraid of the terrifying might of the tribulation lightning, he would have long since launched a counterattack. Seeing Alpha take action was exactly what Sisha wanted, and he was happy to watch the show from the side. Hanjin revealed a tranquil smile. This Archangel of Authority Alpha was really used to being awe-inspiring. He even dared to touch the tribulation clouds. Even the Origin Immortal Lord had to be very, very careful when dealing with tribulation clouds. At Alpha's level of strength, attacking the tribulation clouds would only make him die a little faster, with no other effect. However, the seemingly powerful beam of light stagnated as it approached the tribulation clouds, unable to advance any further. Seeing this strange scene, Alpha's entire body trembled, and his back became slightly hunched. It was as if several mountains had suddenly appeared on his back, making him unable to bear the enormous pressure. One had to realize that this beam of light had surpassed Alpha's own strength, and he had only been able to unleash it through the use of the magic formation carved into his wings of light. Others might not have understood just how powerful this beam of light was, but Alpha was well aware of it. Suddenly, the center of the tribulation clouds darkened for a moment, and then they exploded with dazzling light. A bolt of lightning shot down to meet Alpha's beam of light. Asterisk boom. Asterisk the instant the lightning bolt and the pillar of light came into contact, an explosion that shook the entire divine realm. If Alpha's pillar of light was a mountain that reached the heavens, then the lightning bolt that shot out of the tribulation cloud was a sharp drill. It tore through the pillar of light like it was nothing, and wherever it passed, the pillar of light would be peeled off and scattered, turning into countless streaks of light that splashed in all directions. In the blink of an eye, the beam of light had completely collapsed, and the bolt of lightning continued downward, striking Archangel of Authority Alpha and causing another explosion that shook the divine realm. Hanjin was not at all surprised by this result. He continued to calmly sit in his seat, because this was only the beginning. As the surging shock waves spread out, Alpha's figure gradually appeared. He was in much worse shape than before, and even staggered a few steps before steadying himself. Although he still tightly gripped his sword of light, he no longer had the courage to challenge the tribulation clouds. He could only stare in a daze at the sky, forgetting about the threat of the underworld god Staya and Hanjin. Time slowly passed. Alpha and Staya could only watch as the tribulation clouds churned and churned, unable to do anything to stop them. The tribulation clouds were expanding at a speed that could be seen with the naked eye. When a spiderweb-like bolt of lightning covered the entire sky, dozens of thick purple bolts of lightning shot out from the center of the tribulation clouds. In the blink of an eye, the entire world had turned into a bright purple color. Staya inevitably let out a heart-wrenching scream. In terms of resistance, he was the weakest among the three of them. The grayish-black mist he emitted could not stop the sharp lightning bolts at all. Moreover, the power of the tribulation lightning this time was obviously more ferocious than the last. After splitting Staya into countless wisps of smoke, the lightning bolts were still unwilling to let him go. Strands of blue-purple lightning bolts dashed left and right in the smoke that Staya had turned into. These seemingly small blue-purple lightning bolts carried great lethality, which could be felt from Staya's miserable screams. Alpha's body was originally much tougher than Staya's, and with the protection of the two huge wings of light, the damage he received was not very serious. Of course, this was in comparison to Staya. After this round of lightning strikes, not only had the wings of light behind Alpha become tattered, even the light that enveloped his body had begun to fluctuate, as if it was extremely unstable. Hanjin still looked as calm and steady as Mount Tai, as if he had not suffered the slightest injury under the baptism of the tribulation lightning. However, in reality, he had fallen into a dangerous situation. If not for the endless supply of karma, he would have inevitably shown signs of dejection. Just by looking at the first bolt of lightning, Hanjin knew that not only had he triggered the purple heaven tribulation, but it was also the 95 heavenly tribulation. This kind of treatment was very rare. In the words of his master, only those who walked on the extreme path could trigger the 95 heavenly tribulation. The so-called extreme path was either evil or righteous. Under the 95 heavenly tribulation, there was no way to escape. Even if he made a prompt decision to kill himself, he could not avoid the lightning that was like a maggot attached to the bone. Even if everything turned into ashes, the 95 heavenly tribulation would still be released in full. The test was cruel, but the sweat and the harvest were generally proportional. As long as one could endure it, one could directly step into the Mahayana realm. When one entered the demon realm, one would be a demon lord, and when one entered the immortal realm, one would be an immortal monarch. The tribulation thunder dissipated, and the world returned to silence. However, when Staya painstakingly reformed his body, he was horrified to find that the tribulation clouds in the sky were still surging, as if they were preparing for the next attack. Everyone was well aware of what this meant. From the appearance of the tribulation clouds to the first bolt of tribulation lightning, it took a few minutes. After another minute, the second bolt of tribulation lightning followed. Looking at the current situation, it was likely that the interval between the next bolt of tribulation lightning would not be more than half a minute. As if to verify the judgment of the powerhouses, the third bolt of tribulation lightning fell in the next moment. The momentum was even greater than the previous two, and the whole world seemed to be occupied by these distorted purple lightning. In the flashing lightning, Alpha and Stya were like small boats in a storm, as if they would capsize in the next moment. Only Han Jin's indestructible golden body stood there proudly like a god, silently enduring the tempering of the brilliant heavenly power. The tribulation lightning fell faster and faster, like a purple rainstorm. Thick bolts of lightning lashed down one after another, splashing countless tiny sparks. Under the baptism of the thunderstorm, Stya could no longer make a sound. Only the constantly twisting mist told of the pain he was enduring. At this time, Alpha's appearance was also very miserable. The huge light wings were getting shorter and shorter, and every time the lightning struck Alpha, the white light that wrapped him would weaken a little. After a while, the light became so thin that it was almost unrecognizable. Under the raging thunderstorm, countless crisscrossing cracks finally appeared on the indestructible surface of the indestructible golden body. Correspondingly, dark red blood streaks appeared on Han Jin's skin. However, with the replenishment of the soul fire, these blood streaks quickly disappeared. However, when the next wave of lightning struck, these blood streaks would crawl out and cover Han Jin's skin. Han Jin was finally able to understand why those seniors would show extreme fear when talking about the heavenly tribulation. Death was not terrible, but to watch one's countless years of hard work being destroyed in this sky, full of lightning, one's body and soul would completely collapse. No matter how powerful the enemy was, Han Jin had never been afraid. However, in the face of these thousands of lightning streaks that carried the might of heaven and earth, Han Jin's heart was only filled with awe. The frequency of the lightning strikes was getting faster and faster, more and more concentrated, and the power was getting stronger and stronger. There was no time to breathe. This was no longer a test, but a destruction. In this world, there was no sign of life. Alpha's body trembled like a leaf in a rainstorm. He staggered back and forth amidst the countless bolts of lightning. This kind of power was not something that Han Jin could control, nor was it something that Alpha could resist. The body of the underworld god Stya had already turned into countless strands, and they were still splitting. However, no matter how small those strands were, they could not escape the bombardment of the lightning. Everything in the divine domain of the underworld god Stya had to bear the baptism of the tribulation clouds. The resentful spirits that had not been refined by the grand mist demon refining a ray dissipated in the lightning streaks, turning into a sea of majestic flames that gathered towards Han Jin. The soul fire did not belong to life, nor did it belong to death. At this moment, its existence was just a kind of will. Therefore, those flames floated freely in the lightning streaks and were not affected by the tribulation lightning. Moreover, they had obtained the final relief in the 95 heavenly tribulation. The heavenly tribulation was triggered by Han Jin, so the merit and the result were still attributed to Han Jin. It's over. I found out that I was born to be cheap. I write every day as if there is a whip behind me. Although it is slower and takes longer, I always have a lot of things to write. I need to pay attention to it from time to time. I delete some meaningless things and try to stick to the main line. Now that I haven't written for a few days, I find that my mind has become blank. I sit there and don't know what to write. I'll write these 3,000 words first, eat something and rest for a while, and then write again. Tomorrow, I'll try to write 7,000 words to make up for today's loss. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chijian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. support the original reading. Chapter 578. This was equivalent to replenishing Han Jin's vital energy in disguise. The speed at which the tribulation thunder destroyed the vengeful spirits was far from what the Grand Mist Demon refining array could compare with. Han Jin, who was already in danger, suddenly received the vast sea of soul fire. The immortal golden body expanded a little in the sky, full of lightning, and it seemed to have the momentum to compete with the tribulation clouds. Han Jin let out a sigh of relief. At this rate, resisting the 95 heavenly tribulation would no longer be an extravagant hope. Under the constant influx of the flame of soul, the feeling of being filled to the brim gave Han Jin the urge to roar out loud. However, while Han Jin was able to maintain his balance with ease, the other two powerhouses who were competing for the ownership of the laws could not hold on. The continuous lightning had converged into a giant waterfall with a radius of thousands of meters. Every corner and every inch of space in the divine realm was being baptized by the tribulation thunder. The rippling blue-purple light was almost condensed into a solid substance, and no one could avoid it. After a short moment, a sudden change occurred in the battlefield. In the end, Sisha was unable to withstand the endless tribulation lightning, and the countless black threads that she had transformed into instantly disappeared. Only a small piece of pitch-black fragment that emitted a dense, dark aura was left floating in the air. The fragment seemed to have a mind of its own. It spun a few times in the air before turning into a streak of black light and shooting outwards. However, under the restraint of the primordial demon refining array, it could not go anywhere. It could only watch helplessly as it was struck by the purple lightning. Han Jin raised his eyes, which were flashing with golden light, and quickly formed a few incantations. The space around the fragment seemed to twist for a moment, and then everything was covered by lightning. The moment the fragment disappeared inexplicably, the whole space began to tremble. With the dissipation of Sisha, the divine realm he controlled naturally began to collapse. Huge bottomless cracks appeared out of thin air. The disintegration of space caused the Grand Mist Demon refining array to become unstable. Only the tribulation clouds above were not affected at all. They were still throwing down lightning. More and more cracks appeared, covering the entire space. The wraiths in Sisha's divine realm had long been exhausted. Han Jin's situation became more and more difficult, but he could still hold on. However, Alpha's situation wasn't too good. When had the high and mighty angel ever encountered a situation where he could only take a beating without being able to fight back? However, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't break free from the shackles of the primordial demon refining formation. The light that shrouded Alpha's surroundings had already turned into a faint layer of mist. His tattered wings could no longer stop the lightning from wreaking havoc, and every bolt of lightning left a purplish-black scar on his body. But what frightened Alpha the most was not the pain in his body, but the fact that Sisha was blasted to pieces by the lightning in front of him. Even the remaining shards of his divinity were not spared. It was as if this was a foreshadowing of his end. Finally, when countless cracks extended and extended in the flickering lightning and connected head to tail, accompanied by a deafening bang, Sisha's divine realm completely collapsed. The last trace of the god of the underworld in this world vanished. Alpha was keenly aware of this. As the angel who controlled the plane, he immediately seized the opportunity. His figure turned into a stream of light and shot forward with all his might. Perhaps all his potential burst out in the midst of danger. Alpha's speed reached an unimaginable level. At this moment, his figure was only 200 meters away from Han Jin. The next moment, he was close to the edge of the tribulation clouds. The scattered lightning behind him converged into a comet tail that was nearly 1,000 meters long. The enormous power that erupted from the collapse of space also disintegrated Han Jin's Grand Mist Demon refining array. This was the fundamental reason why Alpha was able to escape. As the saying goes, it's easy to board a pirate ship, but difficult to get off a pirate ship. This was especially true for Han Jin's pirate ship. Perhaps, after missing this opportunity, Alpha could only fight to the death. The moment the Grand Mist Demon refining array collapsed, the lightning bolts bombarded the indestructible golden body without any hindrance. At this moment, Han Jin had lost the protection of the array and no longer had the replenishment of his soul fire. He could only forcibly endure the 9-5 tribulation lightning that would make all self-cultivators pale. The dazzling brilliance of the indestructible golden body dimmed the moment the lightning struck it. Dark red streaks of blood gushed out of Han Jin's eyes, ears, mouth, and nose. Despite suffering such a heavy blow, Han Jin's mind was still clear. He was fully immersed in his own world, as if nothing in the outside world could shake his mind. Under the continuous heavy blows, Han Jin's face flickered in the light of the lightning, gradually turning pale. However, his expression was still expressionless. Instead, it faintly revealed a hint of indifference. Suddenly, a dazzling purple light rushed up to meet the lightning bolts, turning into a dome that covered a radius of hundreds of meters. Han Jin had finally summoned his heavenly Tao. Although the heavenly Tao was tempered with the power of the heavenly tribulation and should have the effect of being familiar with it, the power of the 9-5 heavenly tribulation was too great. Relying on the heavenly Tao alone to resist the tribulation lightning was purely a mantis trying to stop a car. However, Han Jin's goal was to delay. The tribulation lightning would eventually dissipate. If he could delay it for a minute, it would be a minute. Even if he could only delay it for a short second, it would be good. Boom, 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 boom. In a series of collision sounds, the dome quickly collapsed inwards. After only a moment, it completely collapsed. The balls of starlight finally retreated to Han Jin's side. Like a giant bell that was dozens of meters tall, it enveloped Han Jin and the indestructible golden body inside. Han Jin shook his head slightly. As early as half a year ago, he had already imagined this day and made some corresponding preparations. The problem was that the heavenly tribulation came too quickly, too early. In fact, when he decided to step into the abyss world, he never thought that he would break through the final barrier and usher in the heavenly tribulation. Everything was a coincidence, or it could be said that everything was the will of the heavens. There's no other way. Han Jin sighed softly. Then, he formed a seal, and the surrounding scenery suddenly changed. Han Jin was already standing in a barren land. If Ankiel was here, she would immediately recognize the peak that Han Jin had created. She would also recognize the place where Han Jin had planned to build a city and a library. In this vast world, there was only Han Jin alone, and he seemed to be incomparably lonely. Moreover, Han Jin seemed to have forgotten about the danger, casually walking and looking around. The pale sky gradually changed. First, a wisp of blue seeped into the sky. Then, purple light flourished, and a huge tribulation cloud slowly formed in the sky. Sure enough, the maggot-like 95 heavenly tribulation had also followed Han Jin. Han Jin seemed to be unable to see the tribulation thunder above his head. He still indifferently scanned the world that belonged to him. Then, he waved his hand, and a black light shot over from the distance, obediently lying in Han Jin's palm. It was a piece of gravel that emitted a black light. As Han Jin's fingertips gently twisted, the gravel turned into extremely fine dust, fluttering in all directions. Then, Han Jin shook his tattered battle robes and leisurely sat on the ground. The ground behind him slowly rose up, providing Han Jin with a place to lean on. In the next moment, Han Jin raised his head and silently looked at the sky. A trace of a smile blossomed on the corner of his mouth. At this moment, he suddenly remembered the words that his master had said. Do your best and leave the rest to fate. He had done everything he could. As for what the outcome would be, he didn't want to think about it, nor did he care to think about it. Asterisk boom. Asterisk the explosive lightning smashed straight towards Han Jin. It seemed that because it had been brewing for too long, it couldn't wait any longer. The tribulation thunder seemed especially crazy at the beginning, not to mention facing the lightning head-on. Just the roar caused by it piercing through the air was enough to tear one's eardrums. Han Jin slowly closed his eyes and twisted his body, finding the most comfortable position. A series of obscure and ancient golden runes appeared out of nowhere, dancing and circling in the air, blocking the path of the tribulation lightning. Asterisk boom, boom, asterisk deafening explosions rose and fell one after another. Every time they collided, countless golden runes were blasted apart and then disappeared. The lightning that filled the sky was like a giant python that chose to devour people, flying toward Han Jin. From afar, it looked like a huge tornado was hanging down from the sky, and at the center of the lightning storm was Han Jin's lazy figure. Regardless of whether he succeeded or not, Han Jin should be the only one who faced the tribulation with such a mentality. If this was Han Jin's world, then the golden runes fluttering in the air were the power of the laws of Han Jin. However, the divine domain of the god of the underworld, Staya, was unable to stop the tribulation thunder, and the space created by Han Jin was the same. The tribulation thunder seemed to bombard him endlessly. As the runes continued to dissipate, the distant sky and earth became dimmer and dimmer, finally turning into nothingness. Han Jin was still lazy and motionless. Ever since he started cultivating, his heart had never been able to keep up with the progress of his strength. Only now did his heart walk ahead. Finally, the gradually thinning golden runes were no longer able to stop the lightning, and the tribulation thunder fell rapidly, smashing into the immortal golden body. Asterisk boom boom. Asterisk the immortal golden body was constantly twisting in the lightning, and countless fine cracks like a spider web appeared on its body. Han Jin seemed to have really transcended the tribulation, and from the beginning to the end, he did not use any technique. The fierce thunderstorm raged for an unknown period of time. Perhaps it was a few minutes, or perhaps it was more than 10 minutes. The immortal golden body could no longer bear it and exploded, turning into countless dazzling golden lights. Han Jin, who was connected to the immortal golden body, also spat out a mouthful of blood at the same time. The strange thing was that the blood that Han Jin spat out was not bright red, but emitted a faint golden light. The golden lights that the immortal golden body transformed into didn't stop in the air and rushed towards Han Jin. In a moment, Han Jin was plated with a layer of dazzling brilliance. Han Jin seemed to have just woken up. He slowly opened his eyes and looked at the tribulation clouds in the sky. At this moment, Han Jin's vision suddenly became infinite. He even saw the flame tyrant, who was struggling under the sword of the fallen angel Catherine. He saw Yelena, who was riding the undying bird to chase after the Abyss Legion. He saw Sunir, Dominique, and many other friends on the God of War. He even saw Grand Duke Solomon sitting in the study, and Ankiel, who was running quickly in the Abyss world. Of course, he also saw Doreen, who was in her hand. In his field of vision, all kinds of birds were flying happily or jumping and singing on the branches. All kinds of magical beasts were running, lurking, and biting each other. All kinds of fish were swimming in the rivers and oceans. The world became so small that it was like a fingernail. He could see everything clearly, and nothing could block his vision. It was as if everything had become transparent to him. The tribulation clouds had stopped releasing lightning at some point in time. They only rolled there, as if they were brewing something. Occasionally, a few electric arcs would emerge from the depths of the tribulation clouds and land on Han Jin's body. But they were like clay oxen sinking into the sea, disappearing without a trace. Even the golden glow around Han Jin's body couldn't be shaken in the slightest. Han Jin quietly stared at the tribulation clouds. His face was faintly discernible under the illumination of the radiance. It turned out that condensing the indestructible golden body wasn't the ultimate goal. The key was to destroy and then establish. If the indestructible golden body from before was only a Tao technique released by Han Jin with a huge amount of vital energy, then Han Jin had completely fused with the indestructible golden body. In other words, his physical body was truly sanctified. However, without the tempering of the 9-5 Thunder Tribulation, even if Han Jin already knew this principle, he wouldn't have been able to achieve this. It could only be said that Han Jin's luck was really too good to be able to succeed in this tribulation. With Staya and Alpha sharing a considerable part of the pressure for Han Jin, as well as the protection of the Grand Mist Demon refining formation and the replenishment of the Soul Fire. Without any of these factors, Han Jin probably wouldn't have been able to hold on until the tribulation clouds dispersed. At this time, Han Jin should be rejoicing, but strangely, his expression was just as lazy as before. There was neither joy nor sorrow. He couldn't see the impending danger just now, and now he couldn't see the extraordinary path beneath his feet. Have you had enough fun? This was the first time Han Jin spoke since the tribulation. Han Jin's words seemed to have angered the tribulation clouds. In a sudden burst of light, a lightning pillar 1,000 meters thick shot down and smashed towards Han Jin with great force, as if it wanted to blast Han Jin and the mustard seed space into pieces. Han Jin stretched out his hand and pointed at the sky. He didn't release a Dao technique and had forgotten about it. The only thought in his mind was to stop the lightning. Boom! The unstoppable lightning pillar seemed to have crashed into an invisible mountain and exploded in an instant, turning into streaks of purple light and disappearing into the world. Han Jin retracted his hand and silently looked at the tribulation clouds. The tribulation clouds seemed to be afraid of Han Jin's clear gaze and gradually stopped rolling. In a moment, they turned into thousands of wisps and dissipated bit by bit. Han Jin's eyes slowly closed. He didn't know why, nor did he know when it started, but all his worries seemed to have turned into dust that covered a mirror. As long as he wanted to, he could brush them away at any time. However, he didn't like it. Meeting Morrison's, meeting Sunir, Yelena's sacrifice, and many other things might be a kind of karma. He couldn't let go of all of them, and he shouldn't let go of them. Therefore, he had to go back. Even if it was a kind of regression, he wouldn't change his decision. After experiencing so many emotions, there had to be an end. As Han Jin breathed, the pockmarked mustard seed space gradually became lively. Every time Han Jin breathed, there would be a light breeze in the space. When Han Jin fell asleep, there was a light drizzle in the sky, and the outside world that had turned into nothingness gradually grew back. Okay, after the update, I'll squat in the corner and shout Southwall is a pig 100 times. I really want to write well, or at least write out the scenes and feelings said in the outline, but I just can't do it. It's like opening an internet cafe and not playing 97 for a few years. Then, when I got excited and went to the arcade with my friends, I got beaten up by a little girl with a cigarette in her mouth. But I really tried my best. To be continued. If you want to know the future, please go to www.chijian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 579. As the saying goes, a snake without a head can't move without a head. Without Han Jin, the Holy Crown group had become panicky. Although the fallen Angel Catherine and the ascetic Adolf had led the Freedom Union and the tribal reinforcements to launch an attack, killing the flame tyrant Lonker and almost wiping out the army of the Abyss, this great victory didn't ease the anxiety in people's hearts. Han Jin had appeared at the beginning of the battle, but was immediately swallowed by a dark curtain of light. It could be said that the core of the Holy Crown City was in a state of disunity. They did not have a strong bond with each other. It was Han Jin's existence that bound them tightly together. For example, Guevara, although he was not as strong as the Holy Crown City, he had a high status and was the actual commander of the army. But Han Jin was gone. Who could he command? For example, Gao Bin, he dared to bet the fate of the elves on Han Jin. On one hand, it was because of Sunir, and, on the other hand, it was because he knew the future of Han Jin. The missing person certainly had no potential. So what should the elves do? Also, Green was willing to serve the Holy Crown City only because Han Jin had saved him. Later, when facing the threat of the dragon race, Han Jin protected him at all costs. In fact, he had no feelings for the Holy Crown City. Then there was the Holy Crown, led by Jedidius and Adolf. The former regarded Han Jin as a lifelong partner, while the latter regarded Han Jin as the incarnation of the God of Light. So as long as Han Jin's decision was not too outrageous or absurd, they would support Han Jin without hesitation. For various reasons, it seemed that everyone was a little worried. Although they all believed in Han Jin's power, Han Jin broke into the Abyss world alone and challenged the demon race led by Donald. Accidents could happen at any time. Han Jin had mysteriously disappeared without a trace, and there had been no news of him for several days. This was clearly a bad omen. When the sun rose in the sky again, it was already the morning of the fourth day. Not to mention Sunir and the others who had not slept all night. Even Catherine, who was standing at the bow of the ship with her arms folded, looked gloomy. Lennon could only get rid of the shadow of the seal with the help of Han Jin. And only with Han Jin's help could she return to the Heaven Realm and challenge the Angel of Sovereignty Alpha. Without Han Jin, she had no chance of winning. Not only the people of the Holy Crown City group were in a bad mood, but Kemeratsi, Honduras, and the others of the Federation of Freedom were also suffering from uneasiness. When Han Jin had just arrived at the Federation of Freedom with the God of War, Kemeratsi, as the governor, had expressed his intention to side with Han Jin, but Honduras, the speaker, had firmly opposed it. But today he had changed his original position and stood with Kemeratsi. The reason was none other than the threat of the tribal alliance. In a battle a few days ago, although the powerhouses of the Holy Crown City had helped, the Freedom Federation and the Tribal Alliance's reinforcement had suffered great losses in the face of the dying counterattack of the Abyss Warriors. However, the Freedom Federation situation was even worse. Although the Tribal Alliance's reinforcements had lost tens of thousands of Bull Knights and Wyvern Knights, their strength had not been damaged. If they continued to oppose Han Jin, not only would they have offended the Holy Crown City, but once the war was over, they would also become enemies with the Tribal Alliance. Then, how could they guarantee their own safety? Therefore, Honduras had made a 180-degree change. Unfortunately, when he had the opportunity, he did not know how to cherish it. Now that Han Jin had inexplicably disappeared, he had no place to express his loyalty, even though he was full of loyalty. And because of Guevara and the others were in a bad mood, no one would be nice to him. Yelena rubbed her bloodshot eyes and walked out of the cabin. She did not need to look for Han Jin. Just by looking at the expressions of Sunir and the others, she already knew that her hope had been dashed once again. Yelena clenched her teeth, and without saying a word, she turned around and rushed to Baby. Baby and Yelena's connection had not reached the level of telepathy, so it made a tentative sound and looked at Yelena with its head tilted. "Yelena, what are you doing?" Sunir hurriedly stood up. Yelena was speechless for a moment, tears welling up in her eyes. In fact, she did not need to explain what she was going to do. Everyone knew. "Yelena, don't be ridiculous." Galban also stood up. He first gave Sunir a look, indicating that Sunir must hold onto Yelena. Then, he turned around and walked down the cabin. He wanted to wake up Major Domo Gale. In this situation, only Major Domo Gale could stop Yelena's impulse. At this moment, Catherine, who was standing at the bow of the ship, suddenly exclaimed in surprise, "Huh!" A soft ray of light shot from afar and approached the God of War in an instant. An invisible pressure hit them in the face. Then, tens of thousands of rays of light soared into the sky and disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. Han Jin's figure appeared in midair. Han Jin had changed. After seeing Han Jin, everyone had the same feeling, but they could not tell what exactly had changed. In fact, Han Jin's appearance had not changed. It was just that his eyebrows and temperament revealed a sense of untainted purity. However, Han Jin's clothes were not flattering. His red cloak had become messy, like a broken sack. The dragon scale armor on his body was also full of holes, especially in front of his chest. The dragon scale armor seemed to have been cut open by a sharp weapon. The palm-sized pieces of armor hung down softly, revealing the light battle robe inside. At this moment, words were meaningless. As long as one saw Han Jin's tattered battle robe, one would know that Han Jin had experienced an extremely fierce battle. Or rather, he had experienced several battles. Yelena exclaimed and suddenly jumped toward Han Jin. She even forgot to use the flight spell and ignored the gap between her and Han Jin. Han Jin's figure flashed and hugged Yelena's waist. The next moment, he had landed lightly on the deck. His movements looked extremely gentle, but his speed was as fast as lightning. Then, Han Jin smiled and said, "What are you doing? Looking for me?" Yelena did not nod or shake her head. She only hugged Han Jin tightly, as if she relaxed a little, Han Jin would disappear from her sight. The tears that she had been holding back were no longer under her control. They flowed down her cheeks and dripped onto Han Jin's chest. "Raphael." Sunir's voice also became choked. "You're finally back." Gao Bin let out a long sigh of relief. Han Jin's return caused a commotion on the god of war. Domini, who was shy by nature, wanted to talk to Han Jin, but in the end, she stayed where she was and silently looked at Han Jin's back. Soon, Gavura, Zhenglin, and Adolf rushed out of the cabin one after another. Gavara took a deep look at Han Jin and smiled. "You're back. It's good that you're back." "Sir, the Abyss World." Zhenglin wanted to say something, but he did not know what to say. During the battle a few days ago, no reinforcements had appeared from the gates of hell until the Abyss army had completely collapsed. At that time, he had felt that something was wrong. After careful inspection, he found that the teleportation coordinates were blank. He had also sent a few Bull Knight to the gates of hell, but none of them had returned. This proved that the other gates of hell had been tampered with. Zhenglin could not figure out, did the Abyss Demon King Donald not want these troops anymore? What exactly happened there? Now that he saw Han Jin, he could not hold it in anymore. "Donald is dead, and so is Denver." Han Jin smiled and replied softly, "Alpha escaped." After saying this, Han Jin's gaze turned to the sky. He could clearly see the gates of heaven rippling like a reflection in the water. It seemed to be a real existence, but also like an illusory mirage. Han Jin understood that perhaps other than Kathleen, no one else knew what the legendary heaven was. Han Jin's answer was simple, but the meaning behind it was too heavy. Even Gavara, who had experienced many hardships, was dumbfounded. Catherine, on the other hand, couldn't help but tremble when she heard the name Alpha. She stared at Han Jin blankly. "The Archangel, Lord Alpha, is also involved?" Veins popped out on Adolf's neck, and his voice sounded unusually strained. He was very excited. The most loyal warrior of the God of Light, the ruler of the plane, the Archangel Alpha, of course, would join the Battle of Dusk. But in the next moment, he roared again. What? He escaped? An intolerable image appeared in Adolf's mind. When Han Jin, Donald, and Denver were fighting fiercely, the shadow of death once again descended. Alpha, who was originally assisting Han Jin in the battle, was terrified. He ignored Han Jin's safety and escaped alone. Too shameless. He was too shameless. The wrinkles on Adolf's face trembled uncontrollably. This was a blatant betrayal. "I'll go find him," Han Jin said softly. Adolf's roar woke everyone up. Looking at Han Jin's tattered clothes, they could imagine how fierce the battle must have been. After sighing, an indescribable sense of relief surfaced in everyone's hearts. Donald was dead, and so was Denver. Then, was the war really over? What about Nicholas? Gavara suddenly asked. "He returned to Iron Fist City ahead of time and missed the fun," Han Jin said softly. "What? Only you?" Gavara could not believe it. Angie Ale was there too. Her? Why would she be there? You'll have to ask her yourself. Han Jin smiled. "It's complicated. If there's a chance in the future, we'll talk about it slowly." "Sunir, come here." Han Jin extended his hand to Sunir. Sunir had always been reserved in front of others, but now that Han Jin had taken the initiative to invite her, she hesitated for a moment before walking over and gently holding Han Jin's hand. When her gaze swept over Han Jin again, Her eyes began to redden like Yelena's. She then said in a very low but determined voice, "In the future, I'll never leave you again. Don't worry, we'll be together forever." Han Jin smiled. Of course, he would not ignore Yelena. When he said this, his left hand tightened around Yelena's waist, indicating that this would include her forever. To Sunir and Yelena, Han Jin's words were just sweet nothings between lovers. They did not realize that this was a promise made by Han Jin. Morrison's, Sisu, and the others could not help but sigh. Han Jin had just returned from a dangerous place, so he should have left some space for his friends. At this moment, he was in a hurry to hug one woman on each side. Wasn't he placing too much importance on his lover over his friends? "Major Domo Gale," Han Jin suddenly said. "My lord." Major Domo Gale hurriedly responded. His expression was obviously more respectful than before. Donald had died in battle, Denver had died in battle, and Alpha had escaped. Only Han Jin had returned victorious. Then, the title of the strongest in the Bit Wall would be rewritten today. What's more, when Han Jin mentioned that he was going to find Alpha, his tone was very casual. Although he did not despise him, at least he was looking down on him. This proved that Han Jin had overwhelming strength. Major Domo Gale was very shocked, but because he had always been good at hiding his emotions, no one else had noticed his abnormality. Why? Han Jin had only left for a few days, and there had been such a huge change. Although Han Jin was standing in front of him, he felt that he was far away from him. "Please return to the Holy Crown City as soon as possible. Contact Grand Duke Solomon and ask him to come to the Holy Crown City. There are some things that need to be dealt with quickly," Han Jin said. "I'll go back now." Major Domo Gale, the task given to him by Han Jin was not difficult. There was a magic transmission array at the bow, and it would take him less than a minute to return to the Holy Crown City. "Sorry to trouble you," Han Jin said, and then pulled Sunir. "Let's go. I have something to tell you." Sunir and Yelena looked at each other, and then obediently followed beside Han Jin. When Guevara and the others saw that Han Jin was going to have a private talk, they could not stop him. They could only watch Han Jin walk down the cabin step by step. The others were fine, but Harley sighed bitterly. He had accumulated too many questions in the past few days, and if he could not get answers, he would go crazy. As if he had heard Harley's sigh, Han Jin suddenly turned around and glanced at Harley. "Master," Harley said fearfully. Every time Han Jin glanced at him out of the corner of his eye, he would be in trouble. "What's the matter?" Han Jin stopped. "No, nothing." Harley shook his head vigorously. Han Jin did not pay attention to Harley anymore, but a strange smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He slowly walked down the cabin with Sunir and Yelena in his arms. Han Jin left, but the excited people could not keep quiet. The news of Donald's death quickly spread from the God of War. On the other side, Major Domo Gale, who had rushed back to the Holy Crown City, also found Jedis. Interestingly, after asking about Han Jin's situation, Jedis, like Green, immediately asked about Nicholas. Unfortunately, Major Domo Gale did not know much, and he had important matters to attend to, so he simply repeated Han Jin's words and left in a hurry. Jedis was in a dilemma, so he simply activated the magic beacon and informed Green, who was on the God of War, to reactivate the magic transmission array. However, when he stepped on the God of War, Han Jin had already closed the door to all guests. The only thing Jedis could do was to discuss with Morrison's and the others about Han Jin. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chijian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 580. Han Jin had been gone for 6 or 7 days, but his bedroom was still spotless, and the flowers in the vases in the corner were still in full bloom. Sunir didn't have any other hobbies. Apart from her daily training, she always spent a lot of time and energy decorating her room bit by bit. Of course, there was also Han Jin's room. In this regard, Sunir was very domineering. She didn't allow Han Jin to tell her what to do and did as she pleased. However, Hanjin had gone through a severe test. When he was in the World of Warcraft forest, Sunir had made his straw hut look like a girl's boudoir. He even had to sleep on a flower boat. Now this was just child's play. After stepping into the room, Sunir and Yelena looked at each other, then quietly looked at Hanjin. Hanjin had just returned, and he had pulled them here. It couldn't be just to say some intimate words. After being with Hanjin for a long time, they knew very well that Hanjin wasn't someone who liked to indulge in love. There must be something important. Sure enough, after a moment of silence, Hanjin slowly said, Sunir, if I do something that makes you unhappy, or something that makes you angry, will you forgive me? What? Sunir was shocked, then shook her head in panic. No, you won't. After all, Sunir was a strong person who had activated the mark of God. Under normal circumstances, nothing could shake her beliefs and determination. She was panicking because of the hidden meaning in Hanjin's words. What if I must do it? Hanjin sighed softly. You. Sunir was stunned. She didn't understand why Hanjin was like this. Raphael, Yelena shouted angrily. Although she loved Hanjin wholeheartedly, she wouldn't completely lose herself. Moreover, during the few days when Hanjin's life was uncertain, she and Sunir had been accompanying and comforting each other. Seeing Hanjin suddenly make things difficult for Sunir, she couldn't stand it anymore. What are you doing? Sunir pulled on Yelena's arm. Perhaps she was worried that Yelena was too reckless and would annoy Hanjin. Or perhaps she was already confused and subconsciously wanted to grasp something. Let's do it now. You'll find out sooner or later anyway. Hanjin smiled, then stretched out his right hand and waved gently. Sunir and Yelena suddenly felt their vision blur, and then they found themselves in a strange world. Beneath the three of them was a towering mountain peak. Behind them was an undulating mountain range. Waves of fog drifted through the mountain range, and in front of them was a boundless lake. As the breeze blew past, ripples of seven-colored light appeared on the surface of the lake. It was so beautiful that it was dazzling, as if the lake was filled with countless gemstones. The only difference between this world and the outside world was that there seemed to be no life. They couldn't hear the whispers of insects or the chirping of birds, and the mountain range under their feet and behind them didn't have a trace of green. However, the flowing wind was extremely pure. With a gentle breath, a refreshing experience seeped into their hearts and lungs. Sunir and Yelena felt that every bit of their flesh and blood was jumping with joy. The feeling was indescribable. They found that their bodies were becoming lighter and lighter, as if they could break free from the ground at any time and fly into the sky. They should have been cheering loudly, but Sunir and Yelena couldn't laugh. They kept looking at Hanjin's back, waiting for an answer and an explanation. I want to move the tree of life here, Hanjin said softly, pointing forward. Why? Sunir was shocked again. I went to the capital of elements and met Grand Duke Solomon. You should know, right? Hanjin was silent for a moment. I promised him that I would fulfill a few wishes for him. What wishes? Sunir's heart was beating faster and faster. She faintly sensed that Hanjin's strange attitude at this moment was definitely related to Grand Duke Solomon's wishes. I will destroy the beast god totem pole, the demon's pool, the heavenly realm controlled by Alpha, and the elven race's ancient tree of life at all costs, Hanjin said word by word. Sunir suddenly felt her vision go dark. The blood in her chest churned, and she almost couldn't breathe. Hanjin's words were like a cruel stick that almost made her faint on the spot. The ancient tree of life was the symbol of the goddess of nature and the highest belief of the elven race. If this sentence reached the ears of the elves, regardless of gender or age, all the elves would fight Hanjin to the death. The battle wouldn't end until the last elf fell. What was even more frightening was that if Hanjin had already decided to destroy the ancient tree of life at that time, then what about his cooperation with the elven race, his reconciliation with Sunir, and his harmonious relationship with her brother Galbin? Was he deceiving or using her? What? How come I didn't know? Yelena asked in surprise. Because your shoulders are too tender, Hanjin said softly. But at that time, Father told you. The more she spoke, the harder it was for her to speak. However, her meaning was obvious. With Hanjin's ability at that time, asking Hanjin to do all this was simply asking Hanjin to commit suicide. It can be seen that Grand Duke Solomon also didn't think that I could do it. Hanjin smiled. He said, "This should be or our human's dream and goal. It will require several generations, or even more than 10 generations of unremitting efforts." Why did it have to be like this? Yelena's tone was strained. In order to no longer let faith blind our eyes, in order to no longer be a toy, in order to no longer be threatened, or in order to be free. Hanjin said slowly, "Compared to the powerful gods, humans are indeed humble and insignificant. However, we should at least have the right to freely choose our lives. No one can deprive us of this right, not even the gods. I mean, why must we destroy the ancient tree of life?" Yelena cried out, "Because the ancient tree of life is a magic beacon left by the goddess of nature in this plane. If we don't do anything, sooner or later, the power of the goddess of nature will return to our world." Hanjin paused for a moment. Although the goddess of nature is the most gentle among all the gods, we can't entrust our future to others. Our fate should be controlled by ourselves. Sunir shook her head and slowly retreated. Every time she shook her head, a string of tears would fall. She had never thought that Hanjin would actually conspire with Grand Duke Solomon in the capital of elements in an attempt to destroy the ancient tree of life of the elves. Other things might be easy to talk about, but in the face of a major event that would determine the survival of the elves, how could she understand? Hanjin's figure flashed and appeared in front of Sunir. He reached out to grab Sunir's shoulders and whispered, "Sunir, listen to me, go away." Sunir screamed and then struggled with all her might. However, Hanjin's hands contained an incomparably powerful force. They were firmly pressed on Sunir's shoulders as if they were cast from iron. No matter how hard Sunir struggled, she couldn't break free. "Sunir, are you willing to believe me?" Hanjin said slowly. Seeing Sunir's appearance, a touch of pain flashed through his eyes, but he couldn't turn back. When he first heard Grand Duke Solomon talk about the gods, he only felt that Solomon's words were reasonable. Now that he had advanced to the immortal realm, he could clearly feel the energy fluctuations radiating from the gate of heaven. They condensed into an indescribable link that extended into the endless space. Then, the ancient tree of life should be the same. If he wanted to completely cut off the link, he had to destroy the heaven realm and the ancient tree of life. How could Sunir, whose rationality was on the verge of collapse, listen to Hanjin's words? Because her rationality wasn't clear, she forgot her fighting skills. She only tore and kicked Hanjin's body. She didn't think about anything else. She just wanted to get away from Hanjin. "Sunir, are you willing to believe me?" Hanjin's eyes were a little wet. If they were to compare the torment and pain in his heart, Hanjin's suffering was deeper and heavier than Sunir's, because he also had to bear the guilt. In fact, it was very easy to destroy the ancient tree of life. If he really wanted to do it, no one in the elf race could stop him, but he still hadn't made a decision. If it weren't for the fact that he was worried about Sunir, Gaobin, Lydia, and the other elves with Hanjin's style, how could he hesitate? Sunir was desperately twisting, and her fingertips accidentally touched the quiver that was swinging back and forth. She immediately pulled out an arrow, held it tightly, and stabbed it straight at Hanjin's neck. Hanjin didn't want to dodge. He had hurt Sunir so many times, and he deserved to be punished. Sunir didn't even realize what she was doing, but Yelena, who was watching from the side, saw everything clearly. She was so scared that she screamed, "Sunir!" Yelena's scream made Sunir sober up a little. She saw that the sharp tip of the arrow was close to Hanjin's throat. Her hand couldn't help but soften, and the tip of the arrow lost its aim. It pierced through the side of Hanjin's neck, leaving a deep cut. Fresh blood slowly seeped out. "Sunir, are you willing to believe me?" Hanjin didn't seem to feel anything. He was still staring at Sunir. He had already repeated the same sentence 3 times, and each time his tone was heavier than the last. Knowing about Han Jin and Grand Duke Solomon's conspiracy made Sunir's heart ache. Just now, she had hurt Han Jin with her own hands, which was equivalent to adding to the pain. When she saw Han Jin's clear eyes, which were filled with helplessness and sorrow, she couldn't support her body anymore. She softly slid down. Sunir really wanted to take this opportunity to faint. She didn't want to hear anything, see anything, or think anything, and then wake up and forget everything. However, the flowing wind here seemed to contain a strange power that kept nourishing her almost exhausted spirit. "Listen to me, Sunir. I really like you." Han Jin slowly hugged Sunir in his arms and whispered in Sunir's ear. He even forgot to heal himself and let the blood drip on his shoulder. "I won't hurt you, and I won't hurt your companions, so I've thought a lot. Do you see this world? This will become a paradise for the elves. From today onwards, you will live a free life, and no one will be able to hurt you. Also, here, I have the confidence to suppress the power of the goddess of liberty." And Han Jin kept whispering, telling her his helplessness, his purpose, and his fear. Yes, Han Jin was afraid. He was afraid of causing an irreparable break. However, Sunir kept her eyes closed and didn't respond. He didn't know if she heard him or not. Chapter 581. In Han Jin's mustard seed space, the atmosphere was particularly quiet. Han Jin held Sunir in his arms and sat silently on the top of the mountain, while Yelena sat beside him. But Yelena said hesitantly, although she didn't know if Han Jin was right or wrong, she instinctively stood on Sunir's side when she saw Sunir's heartbroken look. "The goddess of liberty hasn't appeared for thousands of years. Maybe she will never come back. If that's the case, you don't have to move the ancient tree of elves, right?" Hearing Yelena's words, Sunir's eyelashes fluttered a few times. Of course, she didn't really faint, but she didn't know how to face Han Jin. On one hand, she was angry that Han Jin wanted the ancient tree of elves, and on the other hand, she was full of guilt for accidentally injuring Han Jin. Han Jin's words from the bottom of his heart moved her, but how could her long-held belief be so easily subverted? Seeing that Yelena had asked the question she was concerned about, Sunir couldn't help but secretly prick up her ears to see how Han Jin would answer. Sunir's subtle reaction naturally couldn't escape Han Jin's eyes. To be honest, Han Jin had expected that Sunir might not agree, but he really didn't expect that Sunir would have such a violent reaction. But after thinking about it carefully, it seemed to be normal. The attitude of the people here was far more devout than in the other world. For example, in the Holy Crown City, if you rushed in and beat up the priest, you might only be punished accordingly. But if you burned down the entire church, the angry believers wouldn't let you go. They might even do something extreme, and even the mild-tempered Jedis might do it. Therefore, Han Jin could understand Sunir's previous reaction. As for the wound on his neck, he didn't care about it at all. The only thing he was worried about was how to convince Sunir. If he couldn't convince Sunir, then the rest of the elves could forget about it. If he wanted to move the ancient tree of life peacefully, he would first have to obtain Gao Bin's approval. Then, he would have to let Gao Bin persuade the elves. Only then would he be able to achieve twice the result with half the effort. He needed Sunir's help. Han Jin was so lost in thought that he forgot to answer Yelena's question. He only reacted when Yelena asked him a second time. After pondering for a while, he said, "Yelena, you said, what is a god?" Yelena opened her mouth. She was stumped by Han Jin's question. She knew what a god was, but it was difficult for her to define it in words. "Actually, they're not as unfathomable as you think." Han Jin smiled. "They're just a life form that's a little more powerful than us." Yelena was stunned by Han Jin's bold words. Her small mouth opened into a cute shape. She wanted to say something, but she didn't know what to say. Actually, Han Jin sighed. The totem pole of the orc race, the demon pool of the abyss, your ancient tree of elves, and the gate of heaven are actually the beacons left by the gods in this world. The reason why they look so mysterious is just a means for the gods to hide their true purpose. What makes you think that the goddess of liberty will do us harm? Everyone on the continent knows that the goddess of liberty is the only peace-loving god. Sunir couldn't bear it anymore. She couldn't believe Han Jin's theory of crisis. Afraid of the return of the goddess of liberty? Why should they be afraid? All the elves have been waiting for the return of the goddess of liberty for countless years. How could it be that Han Jin was a danger that they had to eradicate? Peace-loving? Han Jin shrugged. Sunir said word by word. Also, Raphael, how can you compare the gods with us? This is intolerable blasphemy. If this really spreads, everyone will reject you. Why can't it be compared? We are all living beings, and it's not necessarily that we are nobler than each other. Han Jin paused. After a moment, he finally admitted defeat under Sunir's angry gaze. Well, I'll change my way of saying it. You should understand what a god is. Han Jin's gaze fell on the towering mountain peak not far away. It's a bit too spacious up there. Think about what you should add. Sunir and Yelena looked at each other at the same time, then looked at Han Jin in confusion. They didn't understand the meaning of Han Jin's words. In human legends, the god of light created the whole world. He said there was light, so there was light. Everything in the world was created by the god of light. That's a historical fact that you humans deliberately fabricated. In our elven legends, it was the goddess of liberty who created the ocean and the forest. Sunir angrily interrupted Han Jin. You see, legends are legends, and it's inevitable that there will be times when they aren't true. Since there are elements of falsehood in the human legends, what reason do you have to believe that the elven legends are all true? Han Jin looked at the speechless Sunir with a smile. He didn't dwell on this issue and change the topic. Whether it was the god of light who created the world or the goddess of liberty who created the forest. In short, in all legends, the gods have the ability to create, right? Yelena nodded in agreement, but Sunir was still angry and turned her head away, ignoring Han Jin. Han Jin smiled and continued. Actually, when it comes to creation, it's not only the gods who can do it. I can do it too. You. The two of them stared at Han Jin in disbelief. Yelena, what do you want it to look like? Han Jin smiled. Anything? Yelena was eager to try. Although Sunir tried to keep a straight face, the shock in her eyes had already exposed her thoughts. Anything as long as you can think of it, Han Jin said with a smile. Well, I want a palace, a very, very big one. Yelena said expectantly. Sunir said indifferently. It's good enough that he can make you a thatched cottage, let alone a palace. Han Jin didn't seem to hear the sarcasm in Sunir's words. He still had a calm smile on his face. What do you want? Tell me. What if I can really do it? Sunir pursed her lips and thought for a while, then said, I like water. If it's really possible, let's make that mountain have another waterfall. She was the one who had stabbed Han Jin, but Han Jin acted as if nothing had happened. She really couldn't bear to continue arguing with him. In fact, saying what she wanted at this time was also a temporary concession. As you wish. Han Jin turned around with a smile. He raised his hand and pointed into the distance. Suddenly, a deafening rumble came from the mountain, and strange changes began to take place under Sunir and Yelena's incredulous gazes. The mountain, which had a radius of dozens of miles, seemed to have been cut down by an invisible giant blade. Then, it seemed to have been hit by a huge force and suddenly shattered into countless large and small stones. The gravel first flew into the air and then fell back down. It was a scene that Sunir and Yelena would never forget for the rest of their lives. It was as if there were countless invisible hands manipulating the countless stones. Every piece of gravel, no matter how big or small, fell in the place where it should be. First, a huge palace base appeared in front of them. Then, as the stones continued to fall, huge pillars, walls, and houses appeared from nothing, gradually forming a towering giant palace. All of this took only a few minutes. This was a palace that exuded an ancient and simple aura. Every stone that made up the palace showed an irregular shape. No two stones were exactly the same, but they seemed to have been precisely calculated and fit together. Not a single stone was superfluous, and there was no gap in any place. Sunir and Yelena were completely stunned. What was happening in front of them was simply indescribable. There was only one thought in their minds at this moment, and that was, how is this possible? Oh, I almost forgot. There's also a waterfall. As Hanjin spoke, he waved his hand, and a hole several miles wide suddenly appeared in the mountain below the palace. A violent stream of water gushed out from it, shooting out dozens of meters before it lost its momentum and fell down. Countless splashing water droplets hit the rocks and made a rumbling sound. Even from a distance, Sunir and Yelena could feel the fresh water vapor blowing against their faces. Fortunately, compared to the palace that had been built out of thin air, this waterfall was not as shocking. Sunir and Yelena quickly recovered and looked at Hanjin without blinking. What? You don't believe me? Hanjin was very satisfied with their reactions. He did not do anything, but Sunir and Yelena felt their vision blur. When they looked again, they were already standing outside the palace. Both of them were startled, but neither of them had time to blame Hanjin for his recklessness. Yelena rushed directly to the palace, while Sunir ran to the waterfall. Standing in front of the Holy Crown City, Yelena realized how huge the palace was. The stone pillars, which were hundreds of meters high and dozens of meters thick, pierced straight into the sky like sharp swords. Even the gate of the palace was much higher than the city wall of the Holy Crown City. How could this be a palace? At this moment, Yelena suddenly felt that she had become an extremely small existence. Yelena bit her lips and carefully stretched out a finger toward the stone pillar in front of her, for fear that if she used too much strength, she would destroy this spectacular scene that she had never seen before. Ah, it's real! Yelena exclaimed excitedly. The cold and heavy feeling from her fingertips told her that everything in front of her was not an illusion. Of course it's real. Hanjin laughed involuntarily, and it's very sturdy. You can't break it even with magic. What? Yelena wrinkled her little nose. He was obviously looking down on her. When Sunir came back with a strange expression, she saw Yelena continuously releasing ice blades, fireballs, thunderbolts, and all kinds of magic on the stone pillar. However, the stone pillar remained intact under Yelena's fierce bombardment. Even with her strength as a great magus, she could not even leave a trace on the stone pillar. Don't waste your strength. You can't break it. Hanjin smiled and stopped Yelena. Although Yelena stopped her attack, she looked at Hanjin with eyes that clearly showed that she would not let him off easily if he did not explain clearly. In fact, Yelena could not be blamed for being angry. As a great magus, it would be a big joke if she could not even deal with a few stones. Because I didn't let you break it just now. You could try again now. Hanjin looked at Yelena's indignant little face and really wanted to laugh, but he had no choice but to hold it in. The matter with Sunir had not been settled yet, and he did not want to offend another one. Yelena looked at Hanjin suspiciously, then turned around and tried to release a small fireball. A miracle happened. The small fireball went straight through the center of the stone pillar, leaving a bowl-sized hole. The stone pillar, which had stood firm under so many magic spells, suddenly became extremely fragile. It could not even withstand the lowest level of fireball. Not only Sunir, but even Yelena was shocked. No matter how she looked, the stone pillar in front of her was no different from before. How did it suddenly become like this? You should understand now, right? Hanjin stopped smiling and said slowly, in this space, or rather in this world, I represent the law. If I say there are mountains, then there are mountains. If I say there is water, then there is water. According to your logic, what am I? You? Sunir and Yelena were tongue-tied and did not know what to say. Ha! Don't think so much. You just need to know that in front of you, I am just a man named Raphael, a man who is willing to live with you and never be separated. Hanjin said softly and took both of them into his arms. In fact, I just want to prove to you that God is not an unattainable existence. What they can do, I can do too. Sensing that Sunir was struggling to say something, Hanjin tightened his grip and pressed her down forcefully. Okay, now you should carefully experience the wonders of this world. After saying this, Hanjin suddenly raised his hand and threw Sunir and Yelena out. Yelena was the first to scream and immediately cast a levitation spell. The strange thing was that she could release all kinds of magic just now, but now she could not feel the fluctuation of elements. She could only scream and fall continuously. Finally, with a splash, she fell into the pool that had just formed under the waterfall. Sunir's reaction was obviously calmer than Yelena's. She flipped her body lightly in midair and dove straight into the pool with her head down and feet up. In a few breaths' time, Sunir had already floated up from the bottom of the pool, dragging a panic-stricken Yelena. She was so angry that her eyebrows were furrowed. Just as she was about to shout something, Han Jin stretched out his finger again. The ground suddenly separated, and the pool turned into a surging river, rolling and flowing into the distance. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chijian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 582. Comforting oneself was sometimes self-deception. Just like Sunir and Yelena at this moment. Their battle skirts and robes were soaked and stuck to their bodies, making them uncomfortable. Therefore, after chasing Han Jin away, they took off their battle skirts and robes, wearing only thin undergarments. They sat side by the lake and whispered to each other. In fact, even if they chased Han Jin to the horizon, Han Jin would still be able to clearly see their every move. However, this was not a reason for Sunir and Yelena to compromise. As for whether this protective measure was effective or not, they did not care. Of course, if Han Jin was really peeping from afar, it would only prove that Han Jin was a pervert and had nothing to do with them. After all, they were pure and shy girls. Sunir's mood had obviously improved because she was not stupid and had already figured out the key point. Since Han Jin did not hide anything from her, it proved that Han Jin cared about her very much. Thinking from the perspective of benefits, if they were to fall out with Han Jin now, it would not be good for the future of the elves. Moreover, Han Jin was not someone who could be easily moved or lowered his head. Between a well-tempered steel and a soft touch, only a stupid woman would choose the former. More importantly, Sunir could not let go of this relationship. The moment she saw herself stabbing Han Jin, her heart ached so much that she could not breathe. Therefore, what she should do was not to deliberately ignore Han Jin, but to protect her relationship with Han Jin and the elves in a roundabout way. At this moment, Han Jin was sitting on the other side of the lake. His eyes were half open and half closed, and he was playing with a dark stone in his hand. However, his movements were somewhat cruel. With a gentle twist of his fingertips, the stone would be crushed into dust, but with a wave of his hand, the dust would condense into a stone again. If that stone was a life, it would undoubtedly be living in an endless hell of suffering. Suddenly, Han Jin seemed to have thought of something. He shook his battle robes, stood up, and disappeared in a flash. The next moment, he appeared behind Sunir and Yelena. "We should go back," Han Jin whispered. "We have been here for more than a day. They are very anxious, and we have guests." Yelena screamed. She did not care what Han Jin was saying. She snatched Sunir's arms, wanting to use Sunir to cover her half-exposed body. It seemed that she had learned from Han Jin's attitude. She then shouted angrily, "Go away!" Sunir's reaction was much better than Yelena's. While she hugging Yelena, she turned around and asked, "It's more than a day? It can't be. Haven't you heard of that saying? A day in the mountains is 1,000 years in the world." Han Jin smiled, then grabbed with his fingers. Yelena rolled her eyes and shouted at Han Jin's back, "If you want to eat, you should eat Sister Sunir first." "I've already eaten," Han Jin said bluntly. "You go to hell." Sunir threw the pillow with all her strength. At this moment, she really hated that the pillow was too light and too soft. Sunir's archery was amazingly accurate, but her throwing technique was not complimentary. The pillow flew a few meters away from Han Jin and landed on the wall. At this time, Han Jin had already walked to the door. He turned around and smiled, then walked out and closed the door. The room was silent. After a moment of silence, Yelena suddenly said, "You've already eaten?" Her tone was sour. "Don't listen to his nonsense." Sunir felt ashamed. "You're going to be a king soon, and you're not serious at all." "Serious? But does a king not want to have children?" Yelena's words were simple and direct. Sunir's face became even redder than Yelena's. She didn't know how to answer and couldn't squeeze out a word for a long time. In the end, she simply lay on the bed and faced the other side, ignoring Yelena. "Sister Sunir," Yelena said. Sunir didn't want to talk to Yelena, but when she thought about how she and Yelena would both become queens in the future, she had to carefully protect their relationship. She could only reluctantly respond vaguely. "Sister Sunir, are you tasty?" Yelena said with a smile. Sunir couldn't help but feel angry. She took a deep breath to calm herself down, then turned around and looked at Yelena. You don't understand." "What don't I understand?" Yelena immediately asked seriously. In fact, she didn't want to let go of this topic because she wanted to know the inside story. "You'll have that day sooner or later. Don't laugh." "What's so funny?" "Let me tell you. Asterisk, 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 asterisk on the side of the god of war. Dominique was the first to notice the blue light coming from afar. She also recognized who it was and immediately ordered someone to inform Guevara. She also tidied up her attire and prepared to welcome the frost dragon. In a dozen breaths' time, Ankiel had already approached the god of war. She gradually slowed down and landed lightly on the deck. "Welcome, welcome, Lady Ankiel." Guevara, Zinglin, Jeddis, and Adolf stepped forward to greet them. Since Hanjin had said that Ankiel had always been his comrade in arms in the battle against the Abyss World, they sincerely welcomed Ankiel's arrival with the highest level of respect. Ankiel smiled reluctantly, then threw a skeleton that was tied up like a dumpling to the side. "You? What's wrong?" Guevara and the others only then realized that Ankiel's expression was not good. "I'm sorry," Ankiel said faintly. "I couldn't." She was feeling guilty for not being able to advance and retreat together with Hanjin. But before she could finish her sentence, she was stunned because Hanjin slowly walked out from behind Guevara and the others. "You don't recognize me?" Hanjin smiled. Ankiel was stunned for a moment before a smile slowly blossomed from the corners of her mouth. Her eyes were filled with joy, and the tip of her nose was slightly raised. If it was said that wherever Ankiel went, people would feel as if they were in a world of ice and snow, then Ankiel herself was like a winter jasmine blooming in the snow, elegant and proud. Her dazzling beauty caused the people on the god of war to be unable to extricate themselves from it. Even the ascetic Adolf was in a daze, let alone the others. "I have to admit, it's too unexpected," Ankiel said slowly. "Raphael, you're not a person who easily admits defeat. Since you appeared on the god of war, can I take it that the god of the underworld, Staya, has completely disappeared?" "You guessed correctly." Hanjin sighed softly. He had no intention of hiding anything. "I also obtained the divinity of the god of the underworld, Staya. Although it was only a fragment, it provided me with great help." Guevara and the others all became motionless statues. They only knew that Hanjin had broken into the Abyss World, killed the Demon King Donald, and also killed the Great Lich Denver, who could cause a raging storm at any time. This was equivalent to completely ending the war. But where did the god of the underworld, Staya, come from? The fallen angel Catherine's face also became stiff. Ever since Hanjin's return, she suddenly realized that she could not see through Hanjin. At this moment, Ankiel's words reminded her that her absurd guess was actually true. "You did it?" Ankiel's voice was slightly trembling. Hanjin looked at Ankiel for a long time and slowly nodded. Ankiel's snow-white battle dress fluttered without wind. Her hands were clenched into fists, then slowly loosened, then clenched again. This clearly showed how excited Ankiel was. Because of the difference in their levels, Guevara and the others could not understand what Hanjin and Ankiel were talking about. After all, imagination had its own limits. Only those who had reached that level and had a vague understanding of a higher power would be able to understand the meaning of Ankiel's words. If Han Jin told ordinary people how he defeated a god, it was likely that everyone would treat him as a madman. If Guevara and the others were the audience, they naturally would not suspect that Han Jin was talking nonsense. However, it was very likely that they would feel fearful or at a loss. After all, gods only existed in legends. Facing a new god, what kind of attitude should they maintain? This was also the reason why Han Jin briefly described his experience. If he said too little, he would not be able to explain it clearly. If he said too much, it would become a flaunt. Therefore, it was better to remain silent. Only Ankiel could understand Han Jin's words, actions, and achievements. It could even be said that at this moment, Ankiel was Han Jin's only confidant. The other expert who was qualified to participate in this conversation was naturally the fallen angel Catherine. However, she had not witnessed the battle and could not understand it, so she could only let her imagination run wild. "Have a seat," Han Jin said with a smile as he moved to the side. In Ankiel's dictionary, the word bashful shouldn't exist. Although she clearly knew that Han Jin had already taken the final step, she still acted very naturally. She nodded her head, gently lifted her skirt, and sat down on an armchair. "I was wondering why the black dragons suddenly withdrew," Ankiel said softly. "So it turns out that Valentine was scared out of his wits." "I don't need to scare him. His courage is pitifully small," Han Jin said with a smile. Ankiel could not help but recall Valentine's cowardly actions, especially when Han Jin was seriously injured and the extremely vexed expression on his face. She also smiled and changed the topic. "Nicholas returned to the Grand Light Empire a few days earlier than us. He has already launched an all-out counterattack. Victory is only a matter of time. Have you thought about what we should do next?" "You mean?" Han Jin asked. He did not know when, but he and Ankiel no longer paid attention to using honorifics. "You have already destroyed the demon race, and Denver is dead. Nether Godstaya has also fallen in your hands. Only Valentine is left in the Abyss world. Don't you think that this is the time for us to launch the final attack?" And then, Han Jin asked again, "And then, it's the problem between you and Nicholas. I don't want to be involved." Ankiel paused for a moment and then smiled. "If you wanted to be involved, I might help you, because I can't trust Nicholas." Han Jin remained silent, as if he was deep in thought. Guevara and the others silently looked at Han Jin and Ankiel, while Han Jin was lost in thought. In his absent-mindedness, an atmosphere that he had been deliberately hiding quietly spread. There was distance, a distance that could not be described with words. Han Jin was clearly sitting in the God of War, but everyone felt that Han Jin was extremely far away, and they could not touch him. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chijian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 583. "This can't be rushed," Han Jin said after a long silence. "And I have something more important to do." "What is it?" Ankiel asked. "In a month, I will hold a meeting in the Holy Crown City." Han Jin paused. "If possible, I want to invite all the lords from all over the world, but I don't know if they will accept my invitation." "Lords from all over the world?" Ankiel's eyes flickered. She already knew Han Jin's intention. "Yes," Han Jin said. "No matter what race they are, as long as they are willing to come, I will welcome them." "You are not going to start the War of Divine Grace, are you?" Ankiel laughed. For the people of the Holy See, this sentence was not very pleasant to hear. In the past, Pope Tuya tried to promote the writ of divine grace, which led to the turmoil of the whole continent. Although the Holy See now generally believed that Tuya's methods were too extreme and that everything was his own fault, in the end, the Holy See lost and bowed its head. Whether Ankiel was joking or had a deeper meaning, she should not touch the Holy See's scar. Jed's and Adolf frowned at the same time. "I don't have that much courage." Han Jin also laughed, and "I will not allow them to kill each other." Han Jin's answer was self-contradictory. How could a ruler without courage be qualified to order the lords of all over the world to do what they should and should not do? Obviously, the former was just Han Jin's modesty, while the latter was full of dominance. You think, compared to completely ending the threat of war, is more important? Enkiel asked softly. She was slightly disappointed. The enemy had not been eliminated yet, but Han Jin was eager to establish a kingdom. Wasn't he following in the footsteps of the god of war, Abraham? How should I put it? Han Jin smiled. Actually, I haven't made up my mind because I am just a weapon. If you tell me who the enemy is and let me kill the generals and capture the flag, there is absolutely no problem. If you want me to do this, I'm not qualified. The purpose of this meeting is to listen to the opinions of others. You are too modest, Enkiel said with a smile. I'm not being modest. Han Jin shook his head. My biggest strength is that I can see myself clearly. I know what I can do and what I can do well. I won't interfere in the field that I don't know much about under normal circumstances. I'll let the right people do the right things. That way, I'll be relaxed and avoid unnecessary troubles and mistakes. Why must I force myself? You said you're a weapon? Then there must be someone behind you who is manipulating you? The fact that Han Jin had killed the god of the underworld, Staya, and had even admitted that he had taken over Staya's divinity meant that Han Jin had become a new god, and no one had the right to control him. Enchantment was only joking. You can understand it that way. Han Jin shrugged. Oh, Enkiel stared blankly. That person is... Enkiel suddenly realized something before she could finish her sentence. Her expression changed slightly, and she immediately shut her mouth. What's wrong? Han Jin asked. It's nothing. Enkiel took a deep breath and naturally changed the topic. Did you always like to beat around the bush like this? If I didn't guess your intentions, wouldn't I be delaying your important matters? What intentions do I have? Han Jin laughed. You're only telling me this because you want to use the mouth of the Frost Lord, Angiel, and the Golden Dragon clan to spread your name, Raphael, to the entire world. Enkiel revealed a teasing smile. Letting us tell you about your accomplishments is better than bragging about yourself. It's also easier to convince people, isn't it? Too straightforward. Han Jin chuckled, then said, But Enkiel, will you come? Is this your formal invitation? Enkiel asked, You want me to do it formally? Han Jin said, No problem. Wait a moment. I'll immediately have someone write an invitation. Forget it. I accept your invitation. Enkiel smiled, then fell silent for a moment before saying, Raphael, thank you. Of course, Enkiel knew about the conflict between Han Jin and the Golden Dragon clan. She would be deceiving herself if she said that she was not worried about the future of both sides. However, Han Jin gave her an incomparably clear answer at this moment. Letting Enkiel and the Golden Dragon clan intimidate the lords everywhere meant that Han Jin had extended an olive branch first. Is it necessary? Han Jin asked softly. In the past few years, he had always been able to avert danger. The only time he was in a situation of certain death was in the demon palace of the abyss. It could be said that if Enkiel had any ill intentions, she could kill him completely with a flick of her finger. Moreover, it was Enkiel who protected him, allowing him to escape from Nicholas's threat. If he could not even trust Enkiel, who could he trust? Then I won't take up any more of your time. Enkiel stood up gracefully and pointed at the bundle of bones on the ship. I'll return this fellow to you. With Enkiel's intelligence, of course, she would not rashly mention Doreen's name. Otherwise, it would definitely set off a storm. As for whether Han Jin wanted to tell the truth, that was Han Jin's own business. This fellow is quite honest, right? Han Jin asked. Your magic tools are amazing, Enkiel said. But I don't understand. Why did you have to bring her out of the abyss? You'll know in the future. I hate this part of you the most. Enkiel was somewhat helpless, always pretending to be mysterious. Right now, I really can't tell you. By the time you want to tell me, I might no longer be interested in listening. Enkiel's figure slowly rose into the air. A month? Yes, a month. Han Jin nodded. I hope you can bring more dragon elders over to help me keep up appearances. Enkiel did not say anything else and shot into the distance. In fact, she had only stayed on the god of war for 10 minutes. Once she had finished discussing the matters, she immediately left without any hesitation. Raphael, do you really want to hold the meeting in a month? Seeing that Ankiel had left, Guevara hurriedly asked. Yes. Isn't the time a little too tight? Guevara said. Not to mention other places. Even the patriarchs of the tribal alliance may not listen to our summons. We need a lot of time to convince them. 1 month. I'm afraid it won't be enough. As for the other places, let the dragon race handle them. Hanjin thought for a while and said, as for the tribal alliance, I can personally talk to them. By the way, did Kemoratsi and the others cause any trouble these days? Kemoratsi is not a bad person. At least he can keep up appearances. As for Honduras, I don't think anyone here has a good impression of him. Guevara said, we can't be too calculative with him. If we touch him, it will inevitably cause uneasiness in the tribal alliance. After saying that, Hanjin laughed at himself. I didn't expect that I would learn to compromise now. This is a good thing. It proves that you are becoming more and more mature. Guevara's eyes flickered. In fact, he didn't care about Honduras at all. The only reason he wanted to continue the conversation was to find an opening for Hanjin to talk about what had happened in the Abyss world. He believed that he had to know the truth because the feeling Hanjin gave him just now was too strange and unfamiliar. Raphael, what if some lords are unwilling to come to the Holy Crown City? Jed suddenly asked. They will. What if they won't? Jed's wanted a clear answer. Have you ever heard of the story of a hero who wrings his wrists? Hanjin said slowly. Being bitten by a poisonous snake, in order to save your life, sometimes you have to make a prompt decision. Then why do you believe that your decision is right? Jed's eyes were filled with worry. He felt that Hanjin had become very similar to Nicholas. Those who followed him would prosper, and those who opposed him would perish. As long as they opposed him, they would all be enemies and must be eradicated. I don't believe in myself, but in him. Hanjin smiled. Don't worry. The situation will not become as bad as you think. It won't. It won't. Hanjin's tone was very certain. There is a fundamental difference between him and the tyrants like Nicholas. He had never been attached to power. The only reason he embarked on this path was to accumulate resources faster and more effectively. Raphael. Guevara sat down on Ankiel's seat. Did the god of the underworld, Staya, really appear? You killed him. Hanjin was silent for a moment. His face revealed a dispirited expression. He did not want to talk about this topic. No matter how much Guevara and the others had experienced, they were still ordinary people. They were limited by the framework. If they did not fly into the blue sky, they would not experience the feeling of looking down on the earth. If they did not dive into the deep sea, they would not understand the strange creatures in the sea. Perhaps what Guevara and the others wanted was a heroic scene, a spectacular victory, and then they would cheer and celebrate. The problem was that Hanjin could no longer celebrate with everyone. Seeing that even Guevara could not get Hanjin to speak, Jeds and the others looked at each other and felt a little disappointed. At this moment, Sunir and Yelena walked out side by side. Yelena was wearing a decent white mage robe, while Sunir had changed into a brand new battle dress. It seemed that they had all dressed up, and even Sunir had put on light makeup. Yelena looked around. Where's Lord Ankiel? Is he not here yet? He left a long time ago. You came out too late. Hanjin's smile was a little strange. If it were any other guest, Yelena would not be in such a hurry to show up. Obviously, Yelena and Sunir were a little wary of the beautiful Ankiel. However, perhaps in order to show their generosity, they had never been jealous in front of Ankiel. So fast, Yelena said in surprise. Well, everyone, go to your own things. Hanjin stood up. Mr. Guevara, I will leave the Freedom Federation to you. There shouldn't be any problems, right? Don't worry, we don't need to look for them. They can't wait to stick to us. Guevara laughed. He immediately understood Hanjin's intention. The Holy Crown City needed to set an example. As the saying goes, the power of an example is endless. If the Freedom Federation was obedient, the other lords would have to think carefully. That's good. As soon as his voice fell, Hanjin's figure gradually faded. "Hey, Raphael!" Jeds hurriedly shouted. Unfortunately, he was a little too late. When he reached out his hand, Hanjin had already disappeared, and the skeleton on the deck also disappeared without a trace. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 584. After Ankiel left, Hanjin went back to his old ways. Sometimes he would not show up for a few days, and no one knew where he was. Guevara was very busy, and there were some things that needed Hanjin's approval. Hanjin's laziness was outrageous. Guevara also thought of some ways to persuade Hanjin the next time he saw him. However, Hanjin would just say a few perfunctory words and then disappear without a trace, leaving Guevara staring blankly at the air. After repeating this a few times, Guevara finally understood. He no longer had any illusions about Hanjin and focused on his own work. If he could take responsibility, he would immediately make the decision. If he had to inform Hanjin, he would delay as much as possible. If he couldn't delay any longer, he would call for Gaobin and Jedis. After careful consideration, he would make a decision. This was not only for safety, but also to share the risks. If he was wrong, Gaobin was Hanjin's brother-in-law, and Jeds was Hanjin's good friend. As for Guevara, he could take advantage of his seniority to say that he was Hanjin's elder, and he could at least save some face. In the end, Green could not stand it anymore and helped Guevara several times. As a result, Guevara immediately stuck to him and gave more and more work to Green. Green's status was somewhat similar to that of an honorary chamberlain. Although he was widely respected, he did not have any actual power. However, he did not like to live an idle life because he had no chance to intervene. After all, he came from the center of power, so how could he be willing to do nothing? In the face of Guevara's heavy trust, he did not shirk and accepted it frankly. Whether Hanjin was lazy or not, it could not affect the flow of time. After more than 10 days, the first batch of guests arrived at the Holy Crown City one after another. In fact, the experts of the Holy Crown City did not expect that the Battle of the Abyss with no bystanders would have such a huge impact. Perhaps because no one had witnessed it, people's imagination was unlimited, and it created an immortal legend. The northeast region of the continent was basically under the control of Hanjin and Solomon. Malishun, the mayor of Depew City, had already pledged his loyalty to Hanjin. The only exception was Chesam, the mayor of Cold Shadow City. However, the fact that he had sent so many titans to join Hanjin's camp more or less represented Chesam's attitude. Among all the lords who had received the news, Chesam was the first to arrive at the Holy Crown City. Of course, he also took advantage of the fact that they were adjacent to each other. Needless to say, in the southwest region, the Freedom Federation, the most powerful force, had already announced that it would merge into the territory of the Holy Crown City. Although the Tribal Alliance had not made a clear statement, they had been trying to get closer to the experts of the Holy Crown City. Other lords who were struggling to survive between the two forces, of course, would not miss the opportunity to rely on a more powerful boss. The focus was on the northwest region. The first to arrive at the Holy Crown City was Toronto, the Lord of Highland City. Another expert who accompanied Toronto to the Holy Crown City caused a great uproar among the elves. It was Lola, the founder of the Anti-Nicola Alliance. Lola was a half-elf, but she did not inherit the elven nature. Her methods were swift and decisive, and she had a murderous aura. Among the elves, she had always been praised and criticized. Some elves hated her very much, while others liked her very much. In fact, it was very difficult for a half-elf to make a name for herself. The elves had reasons to exclude her, and the humans had reasons to despise her. However, Lola had overcome all kinds of unfavorable factors, and could even compete with Nicholas for a period of time. Most of the cities in the northwest region responded. The only difference was that those who had the courage to come to the Holy Crown City in person to see what kind of person Han Jin was, while those who did not had the courage to send messengers. On the one hand, they were polite, and on the other hand, they could observe the situation in the Holy Crown City through the messengers. This was no longer a gathering, but a grand pilgrimage that involved more than half of the world. Defeating the god of the underworld Stya was one of the key points, and occupying the godhood of the god of the underworld Stya was even more important. Knowing the intention of Han Jin, Ankiel ordered the giant dragons to spread the news about the power that Han Jin might have. An indescribable pressure swept across the continent like a hurricane. No one dared to ignore the existence of a new god. However, the influx of guests caused some troubles to the Holy Crown City. The city was still small, and there was no mansion in the city that could accommodate a large number of envoys. When Guevara heard the news, he turned his attention to one person. Hal Lister, as the head of the entertainment industry in the Holy Crown City, was ambitiously preparing to expand his territory. He even spent a large sum of money to buy half of the streets around the Elysian Night. Frankly speaking, Hal Lister was a little overzealous. The main reason why his business was so good was that the Holy Crown City had won one victory after another under the leadership of Han Jin. With the support of the Chamber of Commerce in the isolated Cliff City, everyone, from the generals in the army to the ordinary soldiers and the civilians in the city, had some spare cash. However, it was unwise to expand the scale of the business. After all, the population of the Holy Crown City was limited, and so was the spare cash. In modern terms, it would most likely lead to overproduction. As a result, Guevara spent a large sum of money to expropriate the streets that Hal Lister had bought. Hal Lister angrily went to Guevara to argue, but Guevara simply told him that it was Han Jin's order. Hal Lister was speechless on the spot and went back with his tail between his legs. On this day, Guevara was discussing something with Lang Ning and the others in the city hall of the Holy Crown City. The small meeting went quickly because Guevara was eager to return from the teleportation portal. Speaking of this, Guevara was a little angry. He didn't know where Han Jin had gone, and Stillbird didn't dare to move the god of war as he was worried that it would inconvenience or affect Han Jin. Otherwise, the god of war would have already set sail back to the Holy Crown City. Therefore, he had to go back and forth from the teleportation portal more than 10 times a day. Today's situation was a little special. He had to set aside a few hours for the final negotiation with the big leader of the tribal alliance, Thorn of the Southern Heaven. Han Jin's 1-month deadline was getting closer and closer. If the Freedom Federation and the Tribal Alliance surrendered, the Holy Crown City would have occupied half of the continent. This was a trump card. On the contrary, if the Tribal Alliance hadn't been finalized, the Holy Crown City would be in a passive position in the future. Suddenly, Constance, the deputy commander of the newly established Silver Pegasus Legion, pushed open the door of the meeting room and rushed in. She hurriedly said, "My lord, Grand Duke Solomon has arrived." Grand Duke Solomon? Guevara was stunned and immediately stood up. "Let's go and greet him together." Lang Ning, you immediately go to the god of war through the teleportation portal and inform Jeddis and Gaobin. "My lord, what if I can't find Lord Raphael?" Lang Ning hurriedly asked. "If you can't find him, then so be it." Guevara's lips curled up slightly. He finally found a place to vent his resentment. Grand Duke Solomon was Han Jin's future father-in-law. It was a great disrespect for him not to greet him in time. Let Solomon teach Han Jin a lesson. Lang Ning did not understand, but Guevara had already strode out of the meeting room. It was too late for him to ask clearly. Unfortunately, Guevara's plan failed. When Grand Duke Solomon led the magicians of the Phoenix Legion to approach the Holy Crown City, Han Jin was sitting lazily on the clouds, overlooking the Holy Crown City below. Harley stood silently behind Han Jin, while Sunir and Yelena were chatting on the other side. Only Han Jin could see through the layers of clouds and see every change below. Yelena did not realize that her father had already approached the Holy Crown City. For more than 20 days, they had been living a carefree life with Han Jin. At one moment, They were picking sweet wild fruits in the hot woods, and at the next moment, they would run to the ice and snow to watch the spectacular snowstorm, and even dive into the mysterious deep sea. All the obstacles in the world seemed to be non-existent to Han Jin. Even Sunir, who had seen a lot, didn't realize how beautiful the land under her feet was until now. "Harley, do you remember what you said to me when you just came out?" Han Jin suddenly asked. "Ah." Harley was stunned and asked suspiciously, "Master, what did I say?" "You said that you were willing to exchange all the women in your palace for Sunir." Han Jin smiled. "Humph." Hearing Han Jin's words, Sunir snorted coldly. Harley felt cold all over and hurriedly said, "That, Master, I didn't know the identity of Madam at that time." "Ha! Ha! It's a misunderstanding. It's all a misunderstanding. With Madam's natural beauty, not to mention the women in the palace, even if all the women in the whole continent were counted, they could not be compared to her." "What about me?" Yelena could not help but raise her eyebrows. Harley was stunned and wanted to slap himself in the face. This was an unforgivable mistake. "Do you really think that memory is real? Or, before that memory, do you have any other past?" Han Jin said softly. "What?" The red light in Harley's eyes flashed a few times. Obviously, he could not understand Han Jin's intention. After a long time, he asked tentatively, "Master, why do you ask this?" "It's because I sensed a power of darkness in a person's body, and this power, I've only sensed it from you before," Han Jin said slowly. "However, you seem to have used a method to expel that power, leaving only traces that are not easy to detect." Harley was silent. After a long time, he still did not say a word. "Do you want to recall your real memory?" Han Jin paused and smiled. "Do you want to find your real self?" "Master, I am very happy now," Harley said in a low voice. "Are you rejecting me in a roundabout way?" Han Jin asked. Harley was silent again. After a while, he said in a low voice, "Master, if I really did deliberately make myself lose my memories, then it must be a painful and unbearable past. If that's the case, why must I force myself to accept the pain?" In front of Han Jin, Sunir, and the others, this was the first time Harley spoke seriously. The atmosphere was a little heavy. "Okay, I respect your choice, but if you change your mind one day, you can tell me at any time." Han Jin smiled. "Also, Harley, if I can restore your physical body and vitality, do you want to find a wife?" "Yes." Harley replied immediately, then laughed loudly. "Ha ha." The soul-devouring orb and Han Jin were connected mentally. As the spirit of the orb, Harley could clearly feel that Han Jin had an incomparably majestic power. Moreover, Han Jin would not just say it. If he said it, it meant it was possible. When he went out with Morrison's and the others to fool around, he envied those living bodies. Others could have fun, but he could only hide secretly. If he showed his body, it would definitely cause a lot of screams, and the scene would become chaotic and chaotic. "Then tell me, what kind of woman do you want to find?" "First of all, her, but must be big and perky." Harley solemnly stretched out a finger. He did not want to find a wife randomly, and he did not want Han Jin to be perfunctory. "Second, her voice must be sharp enough, ecstatic enough, and boom, a big fireball exploded on the back of Harley's head, and then Sunir and Yelena scolded in unison, "Dirty!" Sunir was still angry, and added, "Raphael, don't worry about him. Let him die." "Master." Harley touched the back of his head awkwardly. He felt wronged. Weren't all men like this? It was just that Harley was very honest, and the others were all hypocrites. "That's it? That's too easy." Han Jin said softly, "You are too careless. Don't you know that I won't let go of any chance to make fun of you?" "Master, no way." Harley's voice trembled. He was not stupid, and he immediately realized where he had neglected. He did not ask for age, race, or appearance. If Han Jin found him an old, ugly woman with a big butt and a sharp voice, wouldn't that be the end of him? Even if that was not the case, he would find him a wife from the Titan race. God, 2 lives without a past. Maybe they can really renew that love. Han Jin sighed softly. "Harley, you must cherish this time, understand?" Harley finally understood. It seemed that Han Jin had already made the choice for him. He hesitated for a long time and could not help but ask tentatively, "Master, can I see the goods first?" "Harley!" Yelena could not help but yell again. "What do you think a girl is?" Harley immediately shut his mouth obediently. If it were an unrelated person, Harley would probably kick that person down from the clouds without any hesitation. "This is me, your father, looking for a wife. What right do you have to tell me what to do?" But in front of Yelena, he did not even dare to think about it. "Raphael, why do you care about him?" Sunir yelled. She was also annoyed by Harley's words just now. "Because there are too many regrets in the world. If it is within my power, I will fix them more or less." Han Jin smiled and said, "Okay, we should go. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chijian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 585. Outside the west gate of the Holy Crown City, Guevara personally led thousands of elite knights in a neat battle formation. Of course, he was not there to fight, but to show his respect to Grand Duke Solomon. A white light appeared above the Holy Crown City. Jedis, Gao Bin, Green, and the others passed through the magic array and saw the scene at the west gate. They also flew over. Gao Bin was the fastest because he was riding on a silver Pegasus. He landed diagonally next to Guevara and jumped off. Then he patted the back of the silver Pegasus, and the silver Pegasus flew away. Jedis was the next to land. He first looked into the distance and whispered, "Grand Duke Solomon is here?" "Yes." Guevara nodded. "What about Raphael? You didn't find him? Can you find him?" Guevara asked. Sigh. Jedzot a long sigh. Although Han Jin used to be a hands-off boss, he still knew how to ask about military and political affairs. But recently, his behavior had become more and more excessive. "I've never seen someone as casual as him. He's just like those recorded in the history books." Before he could finish a sentence, Jeds shut his mouth. Obviously, what he was about to say was not appropriate. Just like those incapable rulers who only know how to eat, drink, and play, and ignore military and political affairs. Guevara added with a smile. Garen, who had landed after Guevara, was shocked. It was unthinkable to criticize a king in such a manner in the kingdom of magnificent light. It was no different from seeking death. Guevara, on the other hand, looked very relaxed and casual. It was as if he did not know that he had committed a grave offense. "Not really," Jedis laughed. "At least Raphael's character is much better than those incapable rulers." "Jedis, can't you see?" Guevara said slowly. "Raphael did it on purpose." "This?" Jedis was stunned. "Why? He is doing it for us to see. I still don't understand why." Jedis stared at Guevara. "You." Guevara shook his head. "This is a hint." Jeds frowned and thought for a moment, then suddenly showed a shocked expression. Could it be Solomon? Han Jin didn't care about anything, and after returning, he immediately asked Major Domo Gale to invite Grand Duke Solomon. Thinking about it carefully, Han Jin seemed to have the intention of handing over the country. This was too absurd. He didn't care about the others, but at least he, Jeds, would be the first to disagree. They were willing to be friends with Han Jin and root the Vatican in the Holy Crown City. Firstly, they were confident in Han Jin's ability. Secondly, they were confident in Han Jin's character. Lastly, they were confident in their partners. Grand Duke Solomon was nothing. The reason they put on such a grand display to welcome someone was because Han Jin had never concealed his respect for Grand Duke Solomon, and they were doing this for Han Jin. Without Han Jin, who would acknowledge a Grand Duke? "You're wrong again," Guevara whispered. "Even if Raphael wanted to, Solomon wouldn't accept it. Just look at Major Domo Gale. Solomon isn't a foolish person." Jeds let out a long sigh of relief. Not only Jed's, but Gaobin's expression also eased a lot. Just a moment ago, his face had turned green. If such a situation really happened, Gaobin would definitely be the first to slap the table and stand up, even if Jeds didn't represent the Holy See. Besides, Do you think Raphael will do this? Guevara laughed softly and looked away from Galbin. If that's the case, many of us will die tragically in the hands of our partners. Maybe even Yelena and Sunir will become enemies. You know Raphael better than I do. Jed smiled bitterly. He understood that this was indeed a false alarm. Ha! Guevara laughed and glanced back. He saw Kemoratsi and Honduras, but didn't see anyone from the tribal alliance. Jeds, didn't you inform Thorn of Tianan? I did. Speaking of Thorn of Tianan, Jeds had a headache, but he said that he was just elected as the great leader. He's young and doesn't have any foundation, so he needs to gather all the tribe leaders to make a decision. So he's not coming. Guevara sneered. He probably won't come. While Guevara and Jeds were talking, on the other side of the continent, in the Freedom Federation, Thorn of Tianan was gesticulating in his tent. All the tribe leaders gathered in front of the tent, but their expressions were not good. Thorn of Tianan's mouth was dry from talking, and he had no choice but to raise a cup of water to moisten his throat. One of the tribe leaders gathered his courage and said, "Great leader, it's not very good to reject Sir Jeds like this, right? Hey, I say, are you willing to be his slave?" Thorn of Tianan glared at him. "Are you born to be a wretch? How good is it for us to be free and unfettered in our own territory? But what if we anger Sir Raphael? I don't need you to say it. I know that even if all of us work together, we wouldn't be Raphael's match." Thorn of Tianan suddenly straightened his expression and slowly said, "But don't forget, Raphael also has a formidable opponent." At this moment, all the tribe leaders widened their eyes at the same time. This was because Hanjin had slowly passed through the tent in an incomprehensible way and stood behind Thorn of Tianan. "You don't know, right?" "Ha!" Seeing the tribe leaders' shocked expressions, Thorn of Tianan's interest was even higher. He slapped the arm of the tent and said, "It's that Grand Light Emperor Nicola." Raphael, Nicola, and Frost Dragon Ankiel entered the abyss together. What does this mean? It means that the three of them are powerhouses of the same level. Although Raphael had a breakthrough in the battle and even killed the god of the underworld, Staya, and obtained his divine spark, the gap between them shouldn't be too big. Therefore, if Raphael wants to get rid of someone, the first person he will definitely kill is Nicola. Fear appeared in the eyes of the tribe leaders. It's over. Their great leader is going to be finished. Can't you guys work harder? Why are all of you so scared at the mention of Raphael? Thorn of Tianan shouted resentfully. Damn, are you still a man? Whoever is still afraid of that Raphael, immediately squat in the corner and pee. A few tribe leaders had already closed their eyes in despair. Things had already reached this point, and there was no turning back. I really don't understand. What are all of you afraid of? Seeing that his words didn't have the slightest effect of boosting morale, Thorn of Tianan became more and more angry. When Raphael goes to deal with Nicola, we can live happily. I know I can't beat him, but I can at least avoid him, right? I can at least not compete with him, right? If he wants gold and silver, I'll give it to him. If he wants magic crystals, I'll give it to him. If he wants women, I'll King give it to him. I don't believe that he would have the nerve to bully us. If they could cry, perhaps some of them would have burst into tears. In any case, it didn't matter if they cried sooner or later. Moreover, that Raphael isn't without weakness, you know? He's lecherous. Thorn of Tianan casually said. After Raphael returned, he disappeared for a few days, but when that frost dragon came, he immediately appeared. Ha ha ha. There's an inside story. In order to increase his persuasiveness, Thorn of Tianan deliberately showed a lecherous expression. That frost dragon is so beautiful. TSK. I'll tell you, it's something you can't imagine. I heard that Nicola left the battlefield one step ahead, leaving only the two of them, drywood burning like a raging fire. After saying that, Thorn of Tianan raised his two thumbs and hooked them a few times before saying with a strange smile, "Ha ha ha. You know, since he has a weakness, what are we afraid of? Send him 1,000 beauties and take turns to seduce him. Even if he has a godhead, he might not be able to withstand it. Ha! Silence. A deathly silence. Thorn Tianan saw that no matter what he said, all the patriarchs below had a sad face, as if their parents had just died. He could no longer suppress his anger and jumped up. Just then, he suddenly felt someone behind him and turn around. When he saw that it was Han Jin, he was so scared that he almost fell to the ground. Fortunately, he was very strong and quickly took a step back to support his body, so he didn't embarrass himself in front of everyone. But some things were far more terrifying than losing face in front of everyone. Thorn of Tianan forced a smile and said, "Ha, Sir Raphael, when did you arrive?" Han Jin didn't say a word and only quietly looked at Thorn of Tianan. Thorn of Tianan felt like he was suffocating. He reluctantly squeezed out a smile and said, "You came here. Ah, I understand. It's about the meeting, right? Alas, I'm also having a headache over this matter. You see, I just became the great leader, but these guys don't listen to me. Everyone, are you all ready?" Han Jin interrupted Thorn of Tianan's complaints. Moreover, he didn't only speak to Thorn of Tianan. His target included everyone present. Ready for what? Was he prepared to welcome death? Although they were aware of this, the patriarchs still remained motionless. Only a few people looked at Thorn of Tianan with resentment. Thorn of Tianan hurriedly opened his mouth. Han Jin gently waved his sleeves, and 10,000 rays of light exploded. All the patriarchs, including Thorn of Tianan, couldn't help but close their eyes. Thorn of Tianan thought that Han Jin was going to hurt someone and subconsciously bent down to grab his weapon. But he was also someone who had experienced great battles and had extraordinary willpower. Just as he was about to move, he abruptly stopped himself. They weren't Han Jin's match. Resisting would only cause more blood to flow. A moment later, the rays of light scattered and Thorn of Tianan felt as if his floating body had returned to the ground. He opened his eyes and saw that Han Jin was still standing in his original position. There was no bloody disaster. Thorn of Tianan forced a smile and said, "Ha, my lord, please don't joke around. I'm a very timid person." The patriarchs opened their eyes one after another and were immediately stunned. Their point of view was different from Thorn of Tianan's. Han Jin was standing in front of Thorn of Tianan, attracting all of his attention. Thorn of Tianan had just spoken so many malicious words and had even been caught red-handed. Thorn of Tianan didn't have the mind to care about anything else. From beginning to end, he was paying attention to Han Jin's every move. The patriarchs were relatively far away. They had already discovered that this was no longer the original camp. There was a spacious promenade under their feet. At the end of the promenade, there was a tall door. In front of the door, there were more than a dozen fully armed knights. It seemed that there was a conference room inside, where some big shots were having a meeting. A patriarch with sharp eyes had already discovered a large flag on the left side of the promenade. When he saw the words on it, he almost fainted. Did they actually run to the Holy Crown City? "My lord, how about this?" Seeing that Han Jin had remained indifferent, Thorn of Tianan became more and more uncertain. He had to take the initiative to say in a low voice, "Please give me 5 days. I'll definitely persuade them. Anyway, isn't the meeting held at the end of the month? There's still time. There's still time." Han Jin still didn't speak. Then, how about 3 days? Thorn Tianan sensibly reduced his bargaining chip. He then observed Han Jin's expression and said in a sorrowful voice, "1 day is enough, my lord. You won't even give us 1 day, will you?" "Great leader." A patriarch whispered, "Shut up. I'm talking with Lord Raphael." "There's no." Thorn of Tianan suddenly turned around and roared. However, like his subordinates, he was stunned. In front of him was a promenade. In the distance, more than a dozen maids were walking over with fruit plates, chatting and laughing. What the hell is this place? Thorn of Tianan suddenly turned around and saw more than a dozen knights standing at the other end of the promenade. He immediately rushed to the right end of the promenade, looked down, looked up at the sky, and finally stood on tiptoe to look into the distance. Then he rushed to the left end of the promenade and saw the fluttering flag. He only felt that his whole body was weak and he had to grab the railing to stabilize himself. Those knights had already seen a group of people inexplicably appear in the promenade. However, they recognized Han Jin, so they didn't act rashly. Otherwise, the alarm would have been sounded. If you don't want to, you can go back, Han Jin said lightly. Then he turned around and walked towards the conference room at the end of the promenade. Thorn of Tianan felt that he was going to collapse. Go back. More than a dozen patriarchs of the tribal alliance were here. A group of generals without a mount. How could they go back? Thorn of Tianan had no doubt that if they decided to leave, they would never be able to get out of the Holy Crown City, let alone through the Magic Beast Forest. More importantly, Han Jin had shown his ultimate strength. Since he could bring more than a dozen people to the Holy Crown City in the blink of an eye, he could also appear in the headquarters of the Tribal Alliance at any time. It was useless to hide. Thorn of Tianan was very clear that there were only two choices in front of him, to bow down or to fight. The patriarchs exchanged glances. They had just escaped from a hopeless situation and didn't want to experience the same horror again. If Thorn Heavenly South still insisted on his opinion, then they could only choose to ignore Thorn Heavenly South and stay behind. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chijian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.